Short Fiction. The Alonzo McTavish Omnibus. 01, To Him Who Waits. As published in The Queenslander. Australia, May 22, 1926. Alonzo McTavish, his hat set at a rakish angle and his green eyeglass fixed firmly in his eye, regarded the resplendent entrance of the Excelsior restaurant, and the brilliant crowd of men and women whose black coats and gorgeous evening gowns turned the oak lounge into a kaleidoscope of color. Alonzo knew the Excelsior well. He wondered whether it knew him too well. Gretton, that persevering Scotland Yard inspector, who had sworn that he would bring Alonzo to book, usually had one or two sleuths about the place just on the off chance of obtaining some sort of evidence which would place the elusive McTavish within the law's long arm. For Alonzo had always managed to go one better than Scotland Yard. He decided to chance it. Almost subconsciously he slipped his hand into the breast pocket of his evening coat, and for a moment a look of anxiety crossed his clean-cut face. Then he smiled. The joke was really too good. He, Alonzo McTavish, the cleverest swell cracksman of 3 continents, had been robbed. His pocket had been neatly picked. Still smiling, he considered the situation. With the exception of a few odd shillings, all his money had been in his pocketbook. He was broke. Being broke meant nothing to Alonzo in the usual course of events. But at the moment, with Gretton still on the lookout for the man who had removed the priceless Delmere rubies from their setting, and a getaway to some quiet spot a necessity, the loss of his money was a serious business. A hand was laid gently on his shoulder, and he turned to look into the smiling face of Dalvarez, the jovial proprietor of the Excelsior. "Mr. McTavish," said that worthy, "It's such a long time since we see you. You've not been in the Excelsior for a month, and I think that perhaps, in some way, I offend." "Not at all, Dalvarez," laughed Alonzo. "I am dining at the Excelsior tonight. But tell me, what are you doing walking about at a time when you should be looking after your customers?" Dalvarez pulled a wry face. "I am seek to deet of the restaurant tonight," he said. "My waiter has not turned up. Drunk once again, I suppose. That man, 3-4 pounds a night in tips alone, and yet is always drunk and neglect my business." A sudden idea flashed into Alonzo's mind. 3 or 4 pounds meant salvation for him. "Look here, Dalvarez," he said with smile. "I've a suggestion to make. I've often wondered what it felt like to be a head waiter, and I rather fancy I'd be good at the job. I'll take your head waiter's place for tonight. It will be a lesson for him and an amusing experience for me." Dalvarez grinned broadly. "Mr. McTavish, you will be the deet of me. But I know you like that you call ze lark. Come with me and we drink a cocktail on ze strength of EET. I only 'ope that pig dog will turn up and see my beautiful new EAD waiter. EEDville he a good lesson for EEM." Alonzo smiled to himself as they crossed the road and made their way to the back entrance of the Excelsior, where, after consuming 3 cocktails apiece to the health of the new head waiter, Dalvarez, still chuckling, escorted Alonzo, who had removed his overcoat and eyeglass, into the brilliantly lit restaurant, and with a parting grin left him to his own devices. Alonzo, left to himself, looked carefully round the restaurant. Many of the diners were known to him. At the little table in the corner sat Patsy Rourke, one of the cleverest pickpockets and confidence men in Europe. Alonzo wondered, as he watched the little, well-groomed man eating his dinner, if his missing pocketbook was, at that moment, reposing in Patsy's pocket. Then, as his eyes left Rourke's table and turned in the direction of the restaurant entrance, he gave an involuntary start. Coming through the entrance were 2 men, one clean-shaven and weak-looking, the other with a pointed beard and well-trimmed mustache. With them walked a girl, whose proud bearing and imperious beauty made her the cynosure of all eyes. Alonzo, as he advanced to meet them, the stock smile of the head waiter on his face, wondered if he would be recognized, for the man with the beard he knew well, Dr. Theodore Clot, crook and blackmailer, but the other man was unknown to him, and the woman whose bearing seemed to show an instinctive dislike for her companions, was also a stranger. Alonso, keeping his face turned away from Clot, showed them to a table in the top left-hand corner of the restaurant which stood just in front of a service screen. When they were seated he left them, and, congratulating himself on the fact that he was still unrecognized, took up a position in the opposite corner, where he could watch the trio unseen. Clot, with his usual quiet suavity, ordered dinner, whilst the other man regarded the girl with something of a sneer on his weak face. Alonso judged him to be a tool of Clot's. The doctor always worked with weak fools, they were easier to manage, thought Alonso. The woman stared straight in front of her, her chin raised proudly, her eyes steady, as if the very sight of her companions was distasteful to her. Just then a little crowd of people entered the restaurant, and Alonso, immersed in his duties, lost sight of Clot and his companions. 20 minutes later he was able to return to his corner. From his point of vantage Alonso saw Clot leaning over the table, and talking to the woman in a low voice, his face determined and cynical. Alonso could see the long white fingers of the girl clasping and unclasping beneath the cover of the table. She was frightened, for all her proud bearing. Throughout his checkered career, Alonso had never failed to help a woman in distress. He wondered what scheme was being plotted at the corner table. The sight of the service screen gave him an idea, and, working his way quietly round the restaurant, he took up a position behind the screen, which, standing behind Clot's table, enabled him to hear what was going on. "My dear girl," Clot was saying in his low and perfect English, "it's not the slightest use adopting that attitude. You have got to pay, and pay quickly, or those letters go to your father. He will be awfully pleased to get them, won't he?" Clot sneered. "He'll be awfully pleased to know that 6 months after your mother married him she was carrying on an affair with our friend here," he indicated the weak-faced man. "Oh, it's easy for you to say that it was very innocent, but do you think that he will believe that? Well, what are you going to do?" "How much do you want?" the girl asked, in a low voice, which trembled a little in spite of her efforts to keep it steady. "I want £2,000 tonight," replied Clot. "This England of yours is getting a little too warm for me. I think a trip to the continent would be beneficial for my health. If you want to close the deal it's got to be done now. I have the letters in my pocket. You can get the money if you want it. Well, go and get it now. We will await you here. Return with the bank notes, and I will hand you the letters, and the little affair is closed." The girl looked up, and from his hiding place Alonso saw the misery in her eyes. "I haven't got 2,000, she said, "but I have £1,500, won't you take that?" Clot grinned. 2,000 is my price, madam," he said. "It will be easy for you to get the balance. Listen to me. It is 8 o'clock now. I will wait here till 9:30, if you do not return with the money by that time, I go straight to your father with the letters. Do you understand?" The girl nodded, and rose wearily. Clot's companion helped her with her cloak with a cynical politeness, and without another word to the two men she turned, and left the restaurant. Clot handed his cigarette case to his companion. "She will find the money, never fear, and then, my friend, you and I will what you call, make tracks for a somewhat more healthy spot." The weak-looking man laughed, and Alonso moved away. As he walked across the restaurant, his glance fell on Patsy Rourke's table, and his mouth twitched with amusement, for Patsy Rourke was, at that very moment busily engaged in paying his bill from the contents of Alonso's note case, which was prominently displayed in the enterprising Patsy's hand. For a moment Alonso hesitated, then an idea flashed into his mind, and, as Rourke, having paid his bill, strolled in the direction of the cloakroom, Alonso followed him. As Rourke came out of the cloakroom Alonso tapped him on the shoulder, and the little man turned with a start to look into the humorous grey eyes of McTavish with something akin to fear on his face. "Hello, Patsy." Alonso greeted the little man cheerfully. "I hope you enjoyed your dinner. I've often wanted to stand you one, and it seems to me that you have gone out of your way to save me the trouble." The humor faded from his eyes and he took the other's arm and drew him into a quiet corner of the vestibule. "Look here, Rourke," Alonzo continued quietly. "With regard to that little matter of my pocket-book. I'm certain that you wouldn't like any unpleasantness about it, would you, Patsy? I rather fancy the police would like the opportunity of getting their fingers on you again, wouldn't they, Patsy? I rather think it would be a 3-year stretch this time, don't you think so, Patsy?" 2 or 3 beads of perspiration showed on Mr. Rourke's forehead. "What's the game, Mac?" he demanded, huskily. "I know I was a blame fool to think I could get away with anything of yours, but swelp me, when I took it off you I didn't know it was you." "What's the game?" he repeated. "Just this, my friend," said Alonzo with a smile. "You've done a little job for your own amusement, and now I suggest that you do another one for mine. Do it successfully, and you can rest assured that I shall forget all about that little business of my pocket-book, otherwise I am afraid I shall have to hand you over." "Well, what's it to be?" Patsy Rourke grinned. "I'm on, Mac," he said. "Hand me out the dope." 5 minutes afterwards, Mr. McTavish took up his position near the corner table occupied by Dr. Clott and his companion. Outside in the vestibule, smoking an excellent cigar provided by Alonzo, and keeping an occasional eye on Dr. Clott, sat Mr. Patsy Rourke, who, as he blew smoke rings in all directions, ruminated on the strangeness of life in general. Alonzo, hidden once more behind the service screen, watched Clott's face, as the girl, punctually on the stroke of 9:30, entered the restaurant. The 2 men rose, with sarcastic politeness as she approached the table, and Clott assisted her to remove her cloak. "Well, madam," he said suavely. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I've got the money," said the girl, laying a packet of bank notes upon the table. "Now give me the letters, and let me go." "All in good time, my dear," replied Clott. He ran his fingers through the notes. £2,000. "Good," he exclaimed. He drew a packet from his breast pocket and handed it to the girl. "Examine them carefully, dear madam," he said with a grin. "You will find that they are all there." The girl opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were a few sheets of blank paper. She looked across the table, her face as white as chalk. "But where are the letters, Dr. Clott?" she asked. Clott laughed mockingly. "My dear girl, you didn't think that I am going to hand over the real letters for a paltry £2,000, did you?" he asked. "The real letters are, at this moment, reposing safely in my breast pocket. Let us regard this money as a little payment on account, and when I return to England in a few months you shall hand me another 2,000, and the letters shall be yours." Her eyes blazed. "Oh, you cheat," she said. "I might have known that your word was worth nothing, that this was a trick." "No trick at all," said Clott. "You have ample time to find the rest of the money, which you will be well advised to collect in time for my return, otherwise," he spread out his hands in an eloquent gesture. The girl rose from her seat, and without a word walked hopelessly out of the restaurant. Clott watched her slim figure recede. "Quite satisfactory," he murmured. "With the £2,000 which I already possessed we have ample capital for our operations abroad." He summoned a waiter. "We will drink to future successes," he said smilingly to his companion. Alonzo, waiting in the vestibule, approached the girl as she neared the entrance. "Please excuse me," he said with a charming smile, "but I am quite harmless, and I think that a few moments' conversation with me will convince you that the world is not such a bad place after all. Will you come and talk to me?" 5 minutes afterwards Alonzo returned to the restaurant in time to observe that Dr. Clott and his companion were about to leave. With a final glance at Mr. Patsy Rourke, who was hanging about in the vicinity of the cloakroom, Alonzo passed through the service doors and made for D'Alvarez's office, where he informed the proprietor of certain events which seemed to excite that voluble gentleman immensely. Dr. Theodore Clat, smoking an excellent cigar, strolled through the vestibule towards the main entrance of the Excelsior. He was smiling and reflecting that life was, financially, quite pleasant, and that the gentle sarcasm to which he had treated the individual who had, on 2 occasions, and for no apparent reason, rudely pushed into him in the cloakroom, was of the first order. A waiter touched his arm apologetically. "Excuse me, sir, but the proprietor would like to speak to you." Clot followed the waiter to D'Alvarez's office. He gave a start as he entered, for, standing behind D'Alvarez's desk, his eyeglass in his eye, and the usual imperturbable smile on his face, stood Mr. Alonzo McTavish. "Sir," said D'Alvarez, leaning back in his chair. "This gentleman, Mr. McTavish, has a serious accusation which to make against you." "Indeed," said Clot, slowly, his eyes on Alonzo, "and may I ask what it is?" "Briefly this," drawled Alonzo. 10 minutes ago I missed my pocket-book from my pocket. A few minutes afterwards I saw you paying your bill with my pocket-book in your hand. As my pocket-book happens to contain £4,000, I thought you might like to return it." Clot drew himself up. "Sir," he said, with dignity, "I know nothing of your pocket-book." "It is a lie." Alonzo shrugged his shoulders. "I suggest that you turn out your pockets," he said. "Otherwise I shall send for the police." Clot smiled. "With great pleasure," he said. He proceeded to turn out his pockets, and, as he withdrew his hand from the breast pocket of his dinner jacket his face went white. In his hand was the pocket-book of Mr. Alonzo McTavish. "This is a frame-up," exclaimed Clot. "Someone has taken some letters from my pocket, and put this in their place." Alonzo smiled. "All right, D'Alvarez," he said, laying his hand upon the proprietor's shoulder. "Don't worry to send for the police, I'll give him a chance this time." He turned to Clot. "Get out," said Alonzo, "and if I see you again, I'll give you in charge." Clot picked up his hat. "You win this time, McTavish," he said. "One day I'll get even with you." The office door slammed behind him. Alonzo returned to the girl. "Here are your mother's letters and your money," he said. "Don't let anyone bluff you again, will you?" A few minutes afterward, he watched her cab recede in the distance. The situation was amusing. The girl had her letters and her money. He had Clot's £2,000. Clot had nothing. He found Patsy Rourke seated in the lounge with a large whiskey and soda. Alonzo threw him a folded £20 note. "It must have been quite an experience for you, Patsy," he said, "to actually put something into someone's pocket. Instead of taking it out, for once. Good night." He strolled back to D'Alvarez's private office. "I am so glad, Mr. McTavish," said that worthy, "that you have got your money back. How bad it would have been if my new EAD waiter had been robbed," he continued with a smile. Alonzo helped himself to a whiskey and soda. "All things come to him who waits," murmured Mr. Alonzo McTavish. 02, The Mauser Pistol. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, June 5, 1926. Mr. Alonzo McTavish, seated in the hot room of the Turkish baths, regarded the only 2 other occupants of the room from the shadow of the alcove which very effectively concealed him from their sight. The first of the men, and the one who appeared to be doing most of the talking, was a tall, thin specimen of humanity of Asiatic type, whose thin, black mustache did little to conceal the line of his sneering lip. The other, a short man, inclined to stoutness, appeared to be suffering from an excess of alcohol, and seemed to be endeavoring to argue with his companion. Alonzo was decidedly interested, for he was certain that he had heard his own name mentioned during the course of conversation. Both of the men were, he thought, unknown to him, and he wondered how he could possibly be the subject of their discussion. The stout man rose to his feet and staggered in the direction of the door and, as Alonzo drew back into the shadow of the alcove, he heard the black-mustached man mutter, "All right, you drunken fool. It's in my pocket. I'll bring it to you later." Through the glass doors Alonzo watched the stout man stagger away in the direction of the cubicles, then, wrapping his towel around him, he quietly opened the door and, unobserved by the remaining occupant of the room, slipped through and made off after the drunken man. Alonzo noted, with some amusement, that the drunken one, whose couch was evidently next to his own, had mistaken his cubicle, and by the time that McTavish had arrived the stout gentleman was already sleeping the sleep of the intoxicated on Alonzo's own couch, and a glance at the recumbent form showed him that it would be a waste of time to endeavor to arouse the sleeper. Alonzo came to the conclusion that there was only one thing to be done, and entering the cubicle to which the drunken one rightly belonged, was about to lie down, when something caught his eye which caused him to give a whistle of astonishment. From the pockets of the stout man's trousers, which hung from a peg beside the couch, protruded the butt of a Mauser pistol. This, in itself, was not at all likely to arouse Alonzo's curiosity. It was the additional fact which amazed him. The pistol was his own. There, on the butt of the pistol, were his initials, inlaid in ivory, A.M. His thoughts were disturbed by the sound of shuffling footsteps outside, and a quick glance through the curtains of the cubicle told him that the black-mustached man, whom he had left in the hot room, was approaching. Alonzo flung himself down on the couch, threw a fold of the towel over his face, and commenced to snore in no uncertain manner. The footsteps outside ceased, and the thin man threw aside the curtains of the cubicle. Through a tear in the towel Alonzo was able to observe the cynical smile which disfigured the saturnine face of the man. In one hand he had an envelope, while the other clasped his bath towel about him. "McGuire, you drunken dog, are you asleep?" he asked. Alonzo turned his face away and grunted. This evidently satisfied the other that he was awake, for, walking to the hanging pair of trousers, the thin man carefully placed the envelope in the side pocket. "Your instructions are in your trouser pocket, McGuire," he said. "Read them carefully when you are awake, and sober, and as carefully destroy them. Also make no mistake, otherwise I shall deal with you." The Mauser pistol caught his eye, and he stood for a moment regarding the annealed but with amusement. "Very good idea, quite good," he muttered. "I am afraid that it would not meet with the complete approval of Mr. Alonzo McTavish, and his astonishment should eventually be rather amusing." The thin man laughed quietly to himself, and, without another glance at the recumbent form on the couch, left the cubicle. Alonzo, his eyes still closed, heard him enter the empty cubicle on his left, where he was evidently making preparations for sleep, whilst the noise of snoring from the drunken individual on his right assured him that there was nothing to be feared from that quarter, and, after waiting 10 minutes until the sound of regular breathing emanating from the thin man's cubicle told him that that worthy was asleep, Alonzo sat up, and reaching ever, extracted the envelope from the pocket of the trousers where the thin man had put it. He tore it open, and found inside a single sheet of paper. Then, with the utmost care he rose from his couch, and slipping between the curtains read the note beneath the dim electric light of the corridor. "Dear McGuire, the address of our friend is 17 Lenox Mansions, and if you call there at 3 o'clock Jay will give you the pistol. The other address is 76 Park Lane. Do the front and library doors, then phone me. There is a telephone in the library, and no one will hear. When you phone I will come and fix the actual job. Meet me afterwards at 10 Grosvenor Court to settle. Have your part of the business done by 3:00. Destroy this immediately. S.E." Alonzo, back on his couch, smiled quietly to himself. Things were beginning to shape themselves in his brain. It was fairly obvious that the instructions in the first part of the note had been carried out. Number 17 Lenox Mansions was his own address, and J evidently stood for Jarvis, his man, who looked after the place. So Jarvis had handed over the Mauser pistol to McGuire. Why? Suddenly, as he recollected the initials at the end of the note, the solution sprang to his mind. S.E. stood for Shapiro Essen, one of the cleverest safe blowers that ever came out of the United States. Mr. Shapiro Essen and Alonzo McTavish had agreed to disagree over one or two little matters some years ago, and evidently this was Shapiro's method of getting even. Having bribed or threatened Alonzo's servant to hand over the pistol, McGuire was to force the front and library doors of 76 Park Lane, and then telephone Essen, who would come along and deal with the safe himself, leaving the Mauser pistol behind, as if it had been accidentally dropped, to constitute damning evidence against Alonzo. Alonzo admitted that the scheme was good. The fortunate part of the business was that, owing to the alcoholic tendencies of the esteemed McGuire, he was in a position to look after himself. He thought quietly to himself, visualizing in his mind schemes for turning the tables on Shapiro Essen. Eventually an idea came to him, and after working out the details of the scheme he dropped off to sleep to the accompaniment of sonorous snoring from the sleeping McGuire in the next cubicle. At 8 o'clock the next morning Alonzo left the Turkish bath, and after partaking of breakfast, sought a public library. A brief examination of Who's Who showed him that the possessor of number 76 Park Lane was an American, Mr. Cyrus K. Harding, who, having amassed a large fortune in canned meat, was now spending it in adding to a world-famous collection of precious stones. He was noted especially as being the owner of 2 pearls reputed to be the largest and finest specimens in the world, the Saros pearls. Pearls were a speciality of Mr. Shapiro Essen, and Alonzo decided that this was the spoil which had attracted him. It was fairly obvious also, that the job was to be done that night, and probably the drunkenness of Mr. McGuire was the result of a celebration in advance. At 10 o'clock Alonzo, having previously telephoned, met a small and perky individual in a well-known bar in Maiden Lane, when, after a short conversation and a whiskey and soda apiece, they repaired to the British Museum, and inspected the models of the 2 famous Saros pearls. Then, the short and perky gentleman, having managed in an extremely expert and unostentatious manner to photograph the models with a vest pocket camera, they bade the curator good morning and left the museum. They parted at the entrance, Alonzo having arranged that the 2 imitation pearls, which the perky gentleman was about to make, should be left at his flat at 10 o'clock that night. These details being settled to his complete satisfaction, Alonzo returned to his flat at Earl's Court, and after greeting the unsuspecting Jarvis went to bed, and 10 minutes afterwards was sleeping the sleep of the innocent. At 3:45 the following morning, Alonzo, lounging in the shadows of Grosvenor Court, observed Mr. McGuire arrive and enter the portals of number 16, a cheap private hotel. Exactly 35 minutes later Mr. Shapiro Essen, immaculately dressed in evening clothes and with his hands in his pockets, strolled along the street and followed in the footsteps of McGuire. Then, having selected and lit a cigarette, Alonzo, whistling to himself, walked slowly round to number 76 Park Lane. 5 minutes' concentrated effort on the front door bell sufficed to arouse the butler, who, clad in a dressing gown, and somewhat outraged at being disturbed, opened the front door. "You might tell Mr. Harding that I should like the pleasure of a few minutes' conversation," said Alonzo, presenting his card. The butler stared. "Mr. Harding is in bed and asleep, sir," he said. "He would not see you." "Are you aware that it is 4:30 in the morning?" "Precisely," drawled Alonzo. "But I am under the impression that your master might like to know that about half an hour ago his safe was opened and the Saros pearls stolen. Do you think he might be sufficiently interested to get up and discuss the matter?" 15 minutes afterwards Mr. Cyrus K. Harding, the butler, and Alonzo stood in front of the safe. Chief Inspector Gretton, summoned hurriedly from Scotland Yard, was examining the safe carefully. After a few minutes he turned and faced the trio. "Well, the pearls are gone, Mr. Harding, and we've got to do our best to recover them." He faced Alonzo. "You'll have to clear yourself over this, McTavish," he said. "We've never actually got you, but this sort of job is your speciality, and there's another little matter you might explain, this." The inspector produced the Mauser pistol and held the butt towards Alonzo. The initials in white ivory showed plainly on the blued pistol grip. Alonzo yawned. "You'd love to make a case of me, wouldn't you, Inspector?" he smiled. "Really it's most annoying that ratepayers should have to pay for the upkeep of the C.I.D. and that really self-respecting crooks like myself should have to do your work for you. It might interest you to know that the 2 men who stole those pearls will be here in a few minutes. Inspector Dale, of D Division, has by this time arrested them at number 10 Grosvenor Court. I expect the evidence will be on them. The inspector stared. At the same moment the front door bell rang, and a few minutes afterward Shapiro, Essen and McGuire, handcuffed together, were brought in, accompanied by Inspector Dale and 3 policemen. Dale touched his hat to the chief inspector. I was informed at 3:30 o'clock tonight that this burglary was to be attempted. This gentleman informed me personally. He indicated Alonzo. I arrested these 2 men in one of the bedrooms of Chale's Hotel, number 10 Grosvenor Court. Have you got the pearls safely? Asked Cyrus Harding anxiously. Unfortunately, no, sir, replied Dale. No sooner had we entered the room than this man Essen opened the window and threw a small package into the street, shouting out something as he did so. A man outside who was on the point of entering the hotel, picked up the package and ran. We couldn't get him, and he got away with the stuff. Chief Inspector Gretton shrugged his shoulders. Why didn't you inform me earlier, McTavish, he said. We could have arrested them before they left this house. He turned to Harding. Well, I hope we get the pearls, Mr. Harding, he said. But whoever has got them has a good start, and pearls are easily disposed of. Look here, Mr. Harding. Shapiro Essen, his usual cynical grin on his face, spoke. I know where those pearls are. If you care to withdraw this charge against us, I guess I can wise up the inspector as to where he can put his finger on those pearls. But it's got to be made worth my while. The police here have got nothing on me. I can only get 2 or 3 years for that, and if I don't get what I want I guess I can do my time and get what's coming to me when I get out. Harding held out a hand as Gretton was about to speak. I guess it's the best way, Inspector, he said. Look here, he turned to Essen, tell us where the pearls are and I'll withdraw the charge. He left the room and returned in a minute with 10 100-pound notes. When those pearls are returned this money is yours, and you go free, he concluded. Good enough, said Essen. He turned to Dale. The man I threw the pearls to was Jarvis, his servant, he continued, pointing to Alonzo. Jarvis was in on it with us. If you go to Lennox Mansions, Earl's Court, you will find him, and the pearls, too. Just a moment, said Alonzo, as Gretton and Dale made for the door. I think there is a slight misapprehension. The pearls are not at Earl's Court. Alonzo took a step forward and calmly took the bank notes from the hands of Cyrus K. Harding. The 2 Saros pearls are at the bottom of that vase on the mantelpiece, continued Alonzo. You see, I burgled the safe before Mr. Essen got anywhere near it, at 1:30 this morning, and, as you will observe, carefully placed the pearls at the bottom of the vase. The 2 pearls which our friend Essen has so successfully stolen were 2 imitations which I had made this afternoon. Essen left my automatic, which he had obtained from my rascally servant, in the hope that our friend Gretton, who is always desirous of arresting me, would charge me with the burglary. Alonzo took the vase from the mantelpiece, and, turning it upside down, showed the pearls in the palm of his hand. He handed them to Harding with a smile. Say McTavish, you've got some nerve, said the millionaire admiringly. I guess you deserve the £1,000. Exactly, said Alonzo. Now everyone is happy. He smiled at Gretton mischievously. You get your pearls, I get £1,000, and friends Essen and McGuire get time for attempted burglary, and all is well. So I wish you all a very good morning. So saying Alonzo, carefully putting on his hat at its accustomed angle, and affixing his eyeglass in his eye, wandered from the room. They heard the front door bang behind him. A muttered curse came from the lips of Shapiro Essen as he glanced at his accomplice. Strike me pink, gasped Mr. McGuire. 03, The Peacock Fan. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, June 12, 1926. The eyes of the half-breed were riveted on the woman who sat on the lounge seat in the vestibule of the Elect Theatre, and from his seat on the other side of the lounge Alonzo thought he saw a gleam of cynical amusement in their depths. She was beautiful, Alonzo considered, and his mind harked back to the day, years ago, when Kitty Harkness, then a leading lady at the Elect, had, for some reason known only to herself, shielded Alonzo, on the only occasion when the ubiquitous Inspector Gretton had seemed to have a good chance of running him to earth. And, as she sat talking to her well-groomed companion, and swaying the gorgeous peacock fan backward and forwards before her, many a man glanced back admiringly, and not a few women stared enviously at the slim figure, whose flung-back cloak of bronze velvet revealed a shimmering gown whose splendor vied with the brilliant color of the fan. The slowly moving fan hypnotized Alonzo. Deep in his brain its colors stirred some memory, some near-lost thought which seemed to connect the beautiful fan with the sordid atmosphere of a Chinese, yen shop, or a low, Frisco dive. He searched his brain vainly. Where had he seen the peacock fan before? He wondered why the half-breed evinced such interest in the woman with the fan. Half hidden by the heavy velvet curtain which concealed the entrance to the stalls, the eyes of the tall Asiatic never left her. Suddenly a new interest engaged Alonzo. On his right, above him, standing on the top stair of the flight which led to the dress circle, and peering over the edge of the balustrade stood a short Chinaman. His evening suit, though well made, hung badly on the stumpy figure, and his white collar threw into prominence the yellow skin and almond eyes, strange, smiling eyes, which were firmly fixed on the eyes of the half-breed below. The yellow face was familiar to Alonzo. Above the right eye was a small scar, which gave a whimsical appearance to the eye beneath. But Alonzo, during the course of his strange career, had met many Chinamen, in San Francisco, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, and out of the many familiar yellow faces which crowded into his memory he could not place the one which, inscrutably smiling, gazed blandly down on the Asiatic below. A bell sounded in the vestibule announcing that the second act was about to begin, and the woman with the fan rose, and, accompanied by her companion, walked back to her seat in the stalls. Alonzo followed, and, standing in the gangway at the side of the auditorium, saw that the half-breed was seated in the row directly behind the couple, whilst above, in the center of the front row of the dress circle, sat the smiling Chinaman. The play bored Alonzo. Life itself was much more amusing, he thought, as he made his way back into the vestibule. He lit a cigarette and once more tried to place the Chinaman, and to remember where he had seen the wondrous peacock fan before. His curiosity was thoroughly aroused. Why was the half-breed watching the woman with the fan, and why was the smiling Chinaman watching the half-breed? He got his hat and cloak from the cloak-room and left the theater. Near the theater was a telephone box, and Alonzo entered and rang an East number. After a short interval a voice answered him. "Is that you, Lon?" asked Alonzo. "Good. Listen to me. There is a Chinaman sitting in the center of the dress circle at the Elect Theater, Strand. Be outside the theater when he comes out, and follow him. Find out if you can who and what he is. Telephone me in the morning. Get that?" "Right, Mac," the voice answered, and Alonzo strolled back into the Strand. At 11 o'clock he was back in the vestibule of the Elect Theater, his eyes on the exit from the stalls. At the end of the play the woman, the closed fan in her hand, accompanied by her companion, came out. Close behind them was the half-breed. The pair stopped at the entrance of the theater evidently awaiting the arrival of their car, and Alonzo saw the half-breed pass them and walk quickly to the cab rank outside the Savoy Hotel. A moment later Alonzo saw a small two-seater car detach itself from the rank and pull into the pavement on the left-hand side of the road. The half-breed was at the wheel. As he made for the cab rank, Alonzo saw the Chinaman standing at the entrance of the theater, concealed by a pillar, watching the two-seater on the other side of the road. A few paces away, his hat over his eyes and his hands in his pockets, stood Lon. Alonzo secured a cab. "Follow that two-seater when it gets going, and don't lose it, but don't let him see he's being trailed," said Alonzo to the driver, who, after a quick glance at Alonzo's well-cut evening clothes, came to the conclusion that he would be well looked after. From the cab window Alonzo saw the woman and her companion step into their car, which drove off towards Charing Cross. At the same time the half-breed started his two-seater in their wake, and after him came Alonzo's cab. As they passed the theater, McTavish saw the smiling Chinaman slowly walking in the opposite direction with the watchful Lon a few paces in the rear. Charing Cross sped by, then Piccadilly. Soon the lights of Kensington appeared in the distance, but the car containing the woman with the fan and her companion did not slacken its pace, and it seemed that their destination was somewhere outside London. Through the front windows of the cab Alonso could see the figure of the half-breed crouched over the wheel a dozen yards behind the leading car. Something made Alonso glance over his shoulder, and he gave a whistle of astonishment. Through the little window at the back of the cab he saw that a large touring car was behind his taxicab. The electric light was switched on, and leaning back in the corner of the car was the little fat Chinaman. Alonso grinned. He was thoroughly interested. He wondered what would be the end of this strange chase. They passed through Richmond and, with the deserted country road in front of them, the four cars sped through the night. It seemed certain that the first two were unaware that they were being followed. Suddenly, the leading car slackened pace, and about half a mile in front of them Alonso saw, distinct in the bright moonlight, a large country house, standing in its own grounds about 300 yards from the road. It was evidently the destination of the lady of the fan and her escort. Just as suddenly the half-breed's two-seater swung off, and disappeared up a narrow road running off to the right. The pace of the taxicab was too fast for Alonso's driver to follow, and he pulled in to the left of the road. Alonso, his eyes glued to the back window, saw the car containing the Chinaman swing out to the right after the half-breed's two-seater. "Sorry I lost him, sir," said the taxi driver, as Alonso dismounted from the cab. "I was going too fast to get round after him. I'll try and pick him up if you like." "That's all right," said Alonso. "You did your best." He gave the man a couple of pound notes, and stood by the roadside undecided as the taxicab disappeared in the direction of London. Eventually he walked slowly along in the direction of the house, smoking a cigarette. There was a decided idea in his head that something was going to happen, and there seemed nothing for him to do but to carry on and await events. Two things were obvious: firstly, that the Chinaman had given Lon the slip, and, secondly, that the yellow man had known that the two-seater was going to swing off to the right, otherwise his driver could not have slackened pace sufficiently to enable him to get the big car around the sharp corner. About a quarter of a mile from the house Alonso stopped suddenly. A red gleam of light showed for a moment across the fields to his right, and then disappeared. He pushed his way through the hedge, and set off in the direction of the light, for he was certain that it was the rear light of the half-breed's car that he had seen. Keeping in the shadow of the hedge which ran across the field, Alonso made his way towards the place where he had seen the light, and in 5 minutes' time he had proved the correctness of his surmise. Hidden in a little declivity was the two-seater car, unattended. The scheme of the half-breed was plain. He had approached the house from the rear. 15 yards from the car, the engine of which was quietly running, Alonso made out a wicket gate which evidently gave access to the grounds of the house. He passed through this gate, and continued through the trees. A short distance in front of him he could see the gently sloping lawn, which led to the back of the house. Picking his way through the undergrowth, Alonso made his way towards the edge of the lawn. He stopped dead as the noise of splintering glass came to his ears. Almost simultaneously a revolver shot rang out, then another. Peering through the trees, Alonso saw, in the bright moonlight, across the broad lawn, the figure of the half-breed running towards him. In one hand he held a revolver, and in the other, its colors vibrant in the moonlight, was the peacock fan. For a moment Alonso hesitated, undecided. Then, his mind made up, he raced for the car. Behind the dicky seat was a grid for carrying luggage and he managed to seat himself on this. A few seconds later the half-breed sprang to the driver's seat, and the car made off, and turning to the right, sped along a narrow road, which led away from the house. 15 minutes afterwards the car slowed down, and peering round the back Alonso saw that they had stopped outside a small cottage. The half-breed left the car and, walking along the irregular and overgrown path which led to the cottage door, he inserted a key and entered. Alonso followed, and creeping to a window on the right of the door, looked through a small hole in the blind into the room beyond. An extraordinary sight met his gaze. The half-breed had pushed open the door of the room into which Alonso was looking, and with the peacock fan in his hand was gazing at the opposite corner of the room. There, seated in the semi-darkness, for the room was lit only by a flickering lamp, sat the Chinaman smiling inscrutably at the astonished face of the half-breed. "I wish you good evening," said the Chinaman in excellent English. "Mr. Singh, for many years I have awaited the esteemed honor of your acquaintance." He rose and bowed. The half-breed showed his teeth. "Who are you and what do you want?" he asked. Alonso noticed that his fingers had tightened hard around the handle of the fan and that his right hand was creeping in the direction of his hip pocket. The Chinaman smiled. "I am Li Hung," he said softly. "One who wears the yellow jacket and lives above the monastery of Sao Tse. You know it, I believe. Mr. Singh, that darkened temple where our priests were wont to worship, that same dark temple from which you stole the peacock fan." The half-breed laughed. He had recovered his nerve. "Why should I steal this worthless fan, Li Hung?" he asked. "Because of the priceless jewel which is concealed in the handle, Mr. Singh," smiled the Chinaman. "And because it was so written." The half-breed threw the fan upon the table. Then he withdrew his right hand from his pocket, and Alonso saw that it held an automatic pistol. He laid the pistol upon the table within reach, and drawing a cigarette case from his pocket, lit a cigarette. "Well, do we talk business, Li Hung?" he asked. "I suppose you want your share." The Chinaman still smiled. "I want the jewel that is concealed in the handle of the fan," he said quietly. "It is the eye of our God. It must be returned to the temple." The half-breed laughed again. An idea came to Alonso. Through the slightly open door he could see the two men plainly, and almost within his reach was the peacock fan. Alonso quietly put his hand to the door, and pushing it open, sprang for the table. His hand was almost upon the fan when he found his wrist in a grip of steel. Another Chinaman, hidden in the corner of the room, had seized him. Li Hung smiled at him across the table. "Good evening, Mr. McTavish," he said. "I expected you. Just the same, Mr. McTavish. Quick to help one who has befriended you. You would return this fan to Miss Harkness? Have patience. Li Hung does not forget a friend, nor the opium shop on the waterside at San Francisco." Then Alonso remembered. "Ho Lung," he said in astonishment. "You?" "Li Hung is my name," said the Chinaman. "I was Ho Lung, for I have called myself many things in quest of the fan." The half-breed picked up the pistol and showed his teeth in a grin. "Suppose we end all this argument," he said. "I have the fan, which I will return with pleasure," he smiled wickedly at Li Hung, "when I have removed the jewel. My car is outside, and if anyone interferes, it will be the worse for him." With the pistol still in his hand, he unscrewed the end of the fan and touching a hidden spring disclosed in the cavity. Flashing from its place of concealment was a huge diamond. He grinned and inserted his finger in the cavity. As he did so the fan jerked, and he staggered back against the wall, his face gray with agony. Li Hung still smiled. "That was the reason why I would not have you touch the fan, Mr. McTavish," he said. "Underneath the jewel there is a piece of mechanism containing a poison needle. It has done its work." He pointed to the half-breed, who had sunk to the floor, his face distorted with pain. Li Hung rose from his chair. "He will be dead in 10 minutes, he said. He stooped and took the diamond from the dying man's fingers. Then, from the fan he extracted the mechanism which worked the poison needle, and, replacing the handle, handed the fan to Alonso. "It was written that he should die," he said simply. "The eye of our God shall be replaced. The fan's yours to keep or to return to the lady who bought it. This," he handed a small package to Alonso, "is in memory of Ho Lung, who was glad of your courage. Let us go." 4 hours later Alonso, seated at breakfast at the house from which the half-breed had stolen the fan, smiled across the table at Kitty Harkness. "The fan suits you," he said. "I couldn't bear you to lose it." She smiled. "You always were generous, Mr. McTavish," she said. "But you must have had great difficulty in regaining the fan. Was it worth your trouble?" Alonzo smiled. On his way to the house he had unwrapped the package which Li Hung had given him. Inside was a splendid ruby and a scrap of paper. Written on the paper were these words: "Through him who succored the high priest of the temple shall that which was stolen be restored, and to him shall be given the reward of the god." Alonzo passed his cup for more coffee. "I think it was worthwhile," he murmured. 04, The Three Grey Men of Moat Hall. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, June 19, 1926. The atmosphere of the Lion's Tea Shop was restful. Outside, the busy traffic in Southampton Row, and the summer heat, made life unendurable. Alonzo had already consumed 3 pots of China tea, mainly as an excuse for staying on, in order to consider the problem which, for the last hour had engrossed his attention. He propped the newspaper up against the teapot, and read, once again, the paragraph which had caught his eye early that morning. Moat Hall Murder Mystery. Body identified. The body of the man who was found murdered in the entrance hall at Moat Hall, the deserted Sussex mansion, was today identified as that of Karl Kleiner. This information serves to deepen the extraordinary mystery which has puzzled Scotland Yard and the Sussex police for the last fortnight. Kleiner is a clever American crook, who landed in this country only 3 days before he was found stabbed to the heart in Moat Hall. His presence in the empty house is unaccountable. He had been staying at Carrott's Hotel, Mayfair, and had told the hall porter that he was going to Sussex for 2 days and would return to the hotel. Robbery was not the motive for the crime, as his watch and a large diamond ring were found on the body. The medical evidence at the inquest stated that the force which drove the dagger to Kleiner's heart must have been practically superhuman. Alonzo ordered a 4th pot of tea, and considered the mystery. Karl Kleiner was a clever American crook, who had managed, very successfully, to evade the police for the last 5 years. What was he doing down at Moat Hall, in Sussex? An expert burglar does not usually amuse himself inspecting deserted country mansions, Alonzo thought, and Kleiner was very expert, besides which he was a man of imagination, and something told Alonzo that there was more in the sudden visit to the empty mansion than was obvious at the moment. A slim, dark young fellow entered the tea shop, and, catching sight of Alonzo, made his way to the table. "Hello, Mac," he said cheerfully. "I got your phone message all right, but I had to jump about a bit to get the job done, but I think I've got the dope on Kleiner." "Where did you get it, Lon?" asked Alonzo, signaling for another cup. Lon Ferrers grinned. "Do you remember Lopey Steve, Mac?" he asked. Well, he wasn't particularly fond of Kleiner, but he knew more about him than anybody this side of the Atlantic. "Here you are." He threw a folded paper across the table, and drinking the cup of tea which Alonzo had poured out for him, put on his hat. "So long, Mac," he said. "I'd like to know what the game is, but I know it's no use asking. Till next time. So long." Alonzo, left to himself, opened the slip of paper and read. Kleiner came over 3 days before he was found croaked in Moat Hall. He was believed to have some game on down there. Said he was thinking of buying the place, but that was all I wash. There must have been something big on, for Kleiner only went out for big stuff. Hertz, a Dago, who used to be Kleiner's side-stepper, landed in England the day after Kleiner arrived. He had it in for Kleiner, who, he said, had twisted him on their last deal. Hertz may have done Kleiner in. He will stick at nothing. Photo herewith. Alonzo examined the photograph of Hertz carefully. He came to the conclusion that he had never seen such a villainous-looking face in the course of his adventurous career. After some further consideration, Alonzo came to the conclusion that there was nothing for it but to go down to Moat Hall and investigate. He was certain that there was something tangible in Moat Hall, and that Kleiner had been after it. An A.B.C. borrowed from an adjacent chemist's shop told him that there was a train for East Shallock, a station about 5 miles from Moat Hall, at 4:30. He took a cab to his flat at Earl's Court, and packing a suitcase, into which he slipped his automatic pistol, he caught the train and was soon en route for Moat Hall. East Shallock was a small country station that boasted of no cabs or other means of conveyance. Alonso learned that there was an inn 2 miles further along the road where he could find accommodation. Gripping his suitcase, he swung cheerfully along the road, his brain busily endeavoring to evolve some scheme of action. Presently the inn came in sight. It was a prepossessing-looking, old-fashioned place, where Alonso obtained a hearty greeting from the landlord, who, he was glad to find, was inclined to be talkative. "Terrible thing, this 'ere murder, sir," he volunteered presently, as Alonso was eating his dinner in the tiny dining room. "We ain't 'ad a murder in these parts for nigh on 30 year. A strange business for a man to be found stabbed in a house that asn't been lived in for 200 years. But Moat Hall's a strange place, I wouldn't like to spend a night there, and many's the strange tales they do tell about the old house." "Haunted?" queried Alonso, with a smile. "They do say so, sir," replied the landlord. "You see, the Hall used to be a monastery in the olden times, and the monks as were in it never came out of the place. When they died they were just buried by the others. Well, the story goes that at last there was only 3 of them left, and these 3 used to take turn and turn about to guard the treasure that was supposed to be in the vaults underneath. Some rapscallion in the neighborhood, thinking to get the treasure, climbed the monastery wall one night. He was never heard of again, but years after they found what was left of him in the hall, just the same as this 'ere Mr. Kleiner. There's old folk about 'ere who swear they've seen the ghosts of the 3 grey men of Moat Hall, as they are called, walkin' about the grounds at night with daggers in their 'ands, and though it may sound silly like, I've often thought I've seen a light in the windows late at night myself." Alonso, his dinner finished, lit a pipe. It was strange, he thought, that Kleiner should have met his death in the manner of the old legend, for although Alonso did not believe in ghosts, he had encountered strange coincidences in his time. After a few minutes he strolled into the passage between the dining room and the private bar. He looked through the bar door, then drew back quickly out of sight, for, sitting against the bar, drinking a whiskey and soda, was the man whose photograph was in Alonso's pocket, Hertz. Alonso, back in the dining room, considered the situation. What was Hertz doing at Moat Hall? Was it merely curiosity to see the scene of his late partner's death, which had brought him here, or was there some other and more sinister motive? A glance at the inn's register showed him that Hertz had registered as a tourist, with an address in Paris. Alonso smiled gently to himself, and, knocking out his pipe, went up to bed. It was 3 o'clock the next morning. The moon had sunk behind the clouds, and the night was dark as Alonso ascended the bracken-covered path which led to Moat Hall. The outline of the old mansion, ghostly in the dim light, brought to Alonso's mind the landlord's story of the 3 grey men. A convenient tree helped him to scale the wall, and 10 minutes afterwards he forced the dusty shutters which covered a ground-floor window and made his way into the house. Walking on tiptoe he quickly found the entrance hall and examined the spot where the body of Kleiner had been found. The ominous red stain was still on the wooden floor, and, as Alonso's electric flash lamp traveled over the walls of the old place, he wondered whether the story of the treasure was true, and whether Kleiner had thought the tale worth investigating. After a few minutes' search he left the hall and, mounting the wide staircase, examined the rooms on the first floor. Empty and thick with dust, they told him nothing, and, after some 15 minutes' fruitless search he returned to the entrance hall. He flashed his lamp round the place once more, and as the white beam of light fell on the back of the ancient fireplace he stifled an exclamation. Almost hidden behind a projecting stone was a piece of white paper. He picked it up, and a soft whistle of astonishment escaped him. The handwriting was the same as that in the inn register. The note in his hand had been written by Hertz. He opened the folded paper and read. "Dear K. The stuff is in the 3rd vault next to the old torture chamber. wall facing the door. 4th stone from the ground upwards, 6th stone from the wall sideways. Press. When wall opens out, you will find oak cupboard inside. Press middle rows in bunch of flowers carved on right panel, and the cupboard opens. Meet you as arranged. Good luck. H. So Hertz had been in the game with Kleiner. And the stuff was downstairs in the vaults. Alonso sat for a moment, his torch switched off, staring straight at the darkness in front of him. Then a smile curved his lips, and he nodded his head, in silent amusement. After a minute he rose and, walking as quietly as a cat, made his way by the winding stone staircase down to the vaults. The light of his torch enabled him to find the middle vault, the one next to the small square room which had been used as a torture chamber in the olden times. He walked to the opposite wall and, carrying out the instructions in the note, threw his weight against the brick indicated. A moment passed then, with a creaking noise, a square of the stone wall moved outwards, disclosing, as the note had said, the door of an ancient oak-carved cupboard. Alonso stepped back, every nerve strained to catch the slightest sound. Suddenly he switched off his torch, and, moving quickly and silently to the stone staircase which led upstairs, he ascended half a dozen steps. Above him he heard a slight shuffle. Descending quickly, he switched on his torch again, and making his way to the treasure cupboard, he found the middle rose in the bunch of flowers carved on the right panel. He put his thumb on the rose and pressed, and, as the cupboard doors slowly commenced to open, he sprang backwards. A second later an iron bar, worked by some hidden mechanism, came downwards and outwards from the cupboard. Affixed to the top of the bar was a gleaming knife. The bar struck suddenly at the place where Alonso had been standing, then disappeared back into the cupboard. Alonso switched off his torch and dropped it with a crash, then, giving a deep groan, he moved into the shadows. As he did so the light of an electric torch appeared on the stairs and, a moment later, his face working with excitement, the figure of Hertz appeared at the bottom of the stairway. Alonso stepped forward into the circle of light. "Good evening, Mr. Hertz," he said, smiling into the astounded countenance of the other. "How disappointed you must be at the failure of your little scheme. Your annoyance at not seeing me lying dead on the floor must be acute, I am sure." "What the hell do you mean?" gasped Hertz, his face white with fear and anger. "I'll tell you, my friend, exactly what I mean," replied Alonso. "You knew of the existence of this treasure and you wanted to get it. At the same time you were aware that the doors were guarded by this device of the olden time monks, and that if anyone attempted to open the door without knowing the actual secret they would be stabbed by the mechanical knife. I've seen another, exactly like it, in Strasbourg. But you had to get the doors open somehow, and so the idea came to you, that you might kill two birds with one stone. You put Kleiner onto the job, and when he was stabbed you came down to Moat Hall and moved the body upstairs carrying away just as much of the treasure as you could. You saw me enter the hall tonight, and you wrote out that note, which I found in the fireplace, whilst I was on the first floor. You knew that I would descend to the vaults and carry out the instructions in the note, and you hoped to get me out of the way and the treasure chest open a second time. Luckily for me I realized that the note which I found had been written only a few minutes before. I have good eyesight, and I realized that that note was not 3 weeks old. Hard luck, Mr. Hertz." "Who are you, anyway?" asked Hertz angrily. "My name is Alonso McTavish," replied Alonso quietly. Hertz gave an exclamation of surprise. "McTavish," he ejaculated, "why Kleiner often told me about you, the cleverest crook in the world, he called you. Now, look here, McTavish, you've got me beat. I guess you're right about Kleiner. I had to get him out of the way, but he'd have done the same to me. Help me get this stuff away, and we'll go halves. There's a king's fortune in that cupboard. Well, what do you say?" "I don't do business with murderers, Hertz," replied Alonso, quietly. "Say, don't be a fool," Hertz pleaded. "Do you know what that stuff is in the cupboard?" "Well, I'll tell you. Don't you believe any old stories about Monk's treasure, the stuff in that chest is the jewels brought from the Russian churches during the revolution. There's diamond crosses and things worth thousands. I guess some refugee royalists put it here for safety, so that the Bolsheviks shouldn't claim M, thinking that nobody would ever find M out. I found out anyway, and I'm going to have my whack at M. Oh, no, you're not, Mr. Hertz, said Alonzo. I've done some funny things in my time, but I don't work with murderers, and I don't rob churches. This stuff is going to stay exactly where it is for the moment. Alonzo took out his cigarette case and lit a cigarette. Then he looked up, straight into the barrel of the heavy automatic which shone in Hertz's hand. Oh, you think so, my chivalrous friend, do you? Answered Hertz. Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You know too much, and I'm going to see that you don't talk. I'm going to shoot you, my friend, and your body is going into that cupboard when I've cleared it of some of the stuff that's in it. Dead men tell no tales, and something whizzed past Alonzo's head, and Hertz, dropping the revolver, staggered back, his eyes wide with fear. A long knife, unerringly thrown, had transfixed his right arm. Alonzo spun round, then stepped back with an involuntary gasp of astonishment. Half of the wall which separated the vault from the torture chamber had swung back, and in the opening stood the three grey men of Moat Hall. The dim light from the chamber beyond showed faintly on the long grey monks' gowns and the hoods which concealed the faces of the wearers. The tallest of the three stepped forward and spoke to Hertz. "Do not be alarmed, my burglaring friend," he said, speaking with a slight accent. "We are not ghosts, but very much flesh and blood." He bowed to Alonzo. "Sir," he said, "may I introduce myself, Colonel Count Stefan Kativra, late of the Russian Imperial Life Guard." The next grey-gowned figure stepped forward, Lieutenant Kapek Paksky, of the sharpshooters, and, as the third figure advanced, Lieutenant Karolis Ivanov, of the same regiment. Alonzo returned his bow. "I am Alonzo McTavish," he said, "gentleman adventurer, knight of the road, or, if you will, plain crook." Kativra held up his hand. "Sir," he said, "crook or not, you would have protected the holy treasure which we guard, and for that we salute you. For years we have guarded this, the remnants of our church's treasure, and, but for the conversation which we overheard, this murderer would have succeeded in his foul plot. We shall deal with him in good time. As for you, you must leave Moat Hall at once, and never set foot in it again. This you must swear upon your honor, also that you will never mention what you have seen this night." "I give you my word," said Alonzo. "Good," replied the Count. "We have found the ancient legend of the three grey men most useful for our secrecy, and it must be guarded. And now, goodbye. Kapek will see you safely away." Alonzo bowed and followed the silent lieutenant of sharpshooters. As the village clock struck 5 and the dawn broke, Alonzo, whistling quietly to himself, walked along the country road towards the inn. The mystery of Kleiner's death was solved, and Alonzo's curiosity was satisfied. He stood on the crest of the hill and looked back at Moat Hall. Suddenly, on the quiet morning air, a shot rang out, then all was silence. Alonzo raised his cap. "Goodbye, Mr. Hertz," he said, and, singing, strode off to the inn. 05, The House with the Yellow Brick. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, June 26, 1926. It was not the beauty of the girl which had attracted Alonzo's attention, but the color of her stockings. He gazed after her as she hurried up Red Lion Street. He was all the more interested because the stockings were out of keeping with the rest of her attire. Her costume was neat and well-fitting, only the awful stockings erred. He came to the conclusion that he had never, in his whole life, seen such an appalling shade of blue. He dismissed the matter from his mind with a shrug, and once more turned his attention to the matter which had brought him to Red Lion Street. Eventually he found the house he was looking for, tucked away in a little court which ran parallel with the main street. He rang the bell. A tired-eyed woman with a wan smile opened the door. "Any news?" asked Alonzo. "Not a word, Mr. McTavish," answered the woman, fingering her apron nervously. Mr. Mac, you don't think they've done 'im in, do yer? It's 4 days now, and you know what a fool Lon is when 'e's in a corner, hit first and thinks afterwards." After a few reassuring words, Alonzo left the house and walked in the direction of Kingsway. He was worried about Lon. Much more worried than he had shown Lon's wife, whose only fear appeared to be that Lon might hit first. Alonzo realized that little mercy would be shown by Marinsky, and cursed the day when he had conceived the idea of putting Lon on the job of stealing the ivory box. Marinsky had waited 3 years for an opportunity of getting the box, which contained the secret of the treasure chest on Deep Sea Island, and he was not likely to show any mercy to an associate of his sworn enemy, Alonzo McTavish. Every precaution had been taken, and it had seemed that with ordinary care Lon should have succeeded in getting away with the box. Marinsky had been kept under observation for some time, and it was obvious that he was easy in his mind that no suspicion attached to him or his gang for the theft from the West Norwood Museum of the little ivory casket, whose carved figures contained the secret of great wealth. Indeed, so careless had he grown, that Alonzo learned that the ivory box was not even under lock and key, but stood openly on Marinsky's desk. From the other side of Clarges Street, Alonzo had watched Lon negotiate the wall of Marinsky's house, and disappear through the study window into the room where the ivory box was. Lon had not reappeared and nothing had been seen or heard of him since the moment, 4 days ago, when Alonzo had watched him get through the window. McTavish walked slowly down Kingsway, his brain busy with conjectures. A familiar face passed him and he looked round. He grinned as he recognized the woman with the extraordinary blue stockings. One of those flashes of intuition which come sometimes to a woman, but seldom to a man, came to Alonzo at that moment, and he turned and followed the woman. At Leicester Square the woman in the blue stockings took a taxi and Alonzo, securing a cab, still followed. He felt no surprise when her cab stopped at Marinsky's house in Clarges Street, where she paid off her cab and entered. Standing at the corner of the mews opposite Marinsky's house, Alonzo's eyes traveled over the red brick exterior to the library window through which Lon had made his entrance. Suddenly, something caught his eyes. Over the library window, just above the center of the ornamental carving was a brick, of a most peculiar blue color. Alonzo wondered where he had seen that color before, then he remembered. The brick was the exact color of the stockings of the woman who had just entered the house. He considered for a moment, then, with a muttered, "I'll chance it," he dashed to the mews to a public house at the far end, where he knew there was a telephone box. In 2 minutes he was speaking to the house in Red Lion Street. "Is that you, Mrs. Lon? Good. This is McTavish. Tell Bluey to get a cab at once and offer the driver treble fare if he can get to me here at the top of Mullins Mews, Clarges Street, in 12 minutes, goodbye." Alonzo returned to his post, at the other end of the mews, and after 10 minutes' wait observed Bluey's cab arrive. Bluey joined him in response to a signal. "Look here, Bluey," said Alonzo. "There's a woman in that hotel. When she comes out follow and don't lose her. Go back to your cab and tell him to drive round to Clarges Street so that you can pick him up if she takes a taxicab." Bluey obeyed and presently rejoined Alonzo. Just at this moment the woman came out of the house opposite. She waited for a cab, and eventually drove off, with Bluey in pursuit. Alonzo stood gazing after the 2 cabs, wondering, for he had noticed that the woman had changed her blue stockings for an even more appallingly colored pair of mustard yellow ones. Then, as his eyes returned to the house he saw that the blue brick above the library window, worked evidently by some mechanism inside the house, turned slowly over and displayed a side that was mustard yellow, the exact shade of the woman's stockings. Alonzo lit a cigarette and smoked it thoughtfully. Then he crossed the road and rang the bell of Marinsky's home. The door was opened by a sleek butler whose face betrayed no sign of recognition as Alonzo stood smiling at him. "Well, Flash Mick," said Alonzo. "So you're a butler now, are you?" He stepped inside the hall before the other had recovered from his surprise. "I want to see Marinsky," he said. The butler showed his teeth in a grin. "Supposin' he don't want to see you?" he asked. "You take a tip from me and keep clear of Marinski, add about enough of you, McTavish, and it might not be healthy to interfere, so." He stopped suddenly, for Alonzo had stepped forward, and seized his wrist in a jiu-jitsu grip. "Do what I tell you, my friend," said Alonzo, "or it will be the worse for you." "Now, where is Marinski?" "In the study," growled Flash Mick, rubbing his arm as Alonzo released him. "I'll be even with you yet for this, McTavish." Alonzo laughed. "I'll chance that, Mick," he said. "Pretty little grip that, wasn't it?" he added over his shoulder as he ran up the broad staircase which led to Marinski's study. Arrived, he pushed open the door, and stepped into the room. Marinski was at his desk writing. A glance showed Alonzo that the ivory box was not on the desk. "Well, Marinski, and how are you?" asked Alonzo, taking a chair. Marinski put down his pen and, placing the tops of his fingers together, looked at Alonzo. His thin fingers seemed like devil's claws, and his long, thin face and bald head gave him a weird and ghoulish appearance. He smiled evilly. "So it is our friend Alonzo McTavish," he said. "Mr. McTavish. I feel that you have not yet learned that discretion is the better part of valor. I am afraid that is a lesson which, eventually, I shall have to teach you, even as your bright assistant, Lon Ferrers, is being taught at the moment." Alonzo threw his cigarette end into the grate. "Marinski," he said. "It will be a bad day for you when I learn that anything has happened to Lon Ferrers." Marinski laughed. "Have you not learned, young man, that threats do not frighten me? Your friend, Ferrers, abstracted an ivory box, in which you and I are both interested. He got rid of this box in some marvelous way, possibly by throwing it from a window, for we caught him before he got out of the house. I want to know where that box is. Beyond that, Ferrers does not interest me." Alonzo realized that no good would be done by further conversation with Marinski, so, with a sarcastic "good morning" and a final warning, he left the house. He wondered if Bluey had managed to find out anything about the girl with the peculiar stockings, for he was certain that the colored brick above the window in the Clarges Street house, and the peculiar colored stockings of the girl, constituted some sort of signal. However, nothing could be done at the moment and, deep in thought, he made his way back to his flat in Earl's Court. It was 3:30 when his telephone bell rang, and he put the receiver to his ear to hear the excited voice of Bluey at the other end. "That you, Mac? Good. Listen. I traced her to the end of a narrow road that leads off the Mile End Road, and she walks up and down one side until somebody in the end who's raised the window curtain. This must have been a signal, for she walks down the street, and presently stops at a booze halfway down the street. She went in, and directly the door shut I nipped down, and as I was passin' the booze I gave Lon's whistle. Somebody whistled back, and it seemed to come from the grating over the basement. I'm certain it was Lon, and I was all for bustin' the front door in, but I thought I'd better leave it to you. What's the next move?" "Meet me at Mile End Church at 11 o'clock, replied Alonzo. "Bring a gun with you. In the meantime you can keep an eye on Clarges Street." "Good work, Bluey." It was midnight when Alonzo forced the door of the house in Ratton Street, off the Mile End Road and, with Bluey on guard on the other side of the street, stepped into the hall. He stood at the bottom of the rickety staircase and whistled softly a few bars of an old song, a favorite melody of Lon's. Then he listened. From somewhere below very softly came an answering whistle. A search revealed a door under the stairs, and he descended into what had evidently been a coal cellar. He whistled again, and this time the reply was fairly distinct. He flashed his torch, and the light showed him a door at the far end of the cellar. A few minutes sufficed to open the cheap lock on the door and, flashing his torch into the darkness within, he saw Lon, handcuffed hand and foot and securely chained to an iron staple in the wall. "Evening, Mac," said Lon laconically. "I guessed you'd turn up." You're just in time, too. They tell me that bomb there is due to go off in an hour's time. Alonzo grinned sympathetically, as he saw the infernal machine in the corner of the cupboard and, drawing a bunch of skeleton keys from his pocket, commenced operations on the handcuffs. "I'm glad you turned up, Mac," said Lon. "I was just wondering what I should do when they called my bluff." "What bluff?" asked McTavish, his deft fingers at work with the skeleton keys. "I've refused to tell them where the ivory box is," replied Lon. "When I got into Marinsky's room I saw the box on the top of the desk. I grabbed it, but just as I was turning to get out of the window I heard a step outside the door, and before I could say, 'knife,' Marinsky and Flash Mick came into the room. Quick as a flash, I pushed the ivory box behind a coal scuttle which stood by the window, and then, slipping behind the curtain, pretended to throw something out of the window. They're both certain that I threw the box to someone outside. Marinsky has been at me every day to know where the box is, and I promised to tell him tonight if he came down himself. I had an idea that you might follow him and—" Alonzo held up a warning finger, for the sound of a footstep above them had come distinctly to his ears. He switched off his torch and, signaling Lon to remain silent, moved quietly to the foot of the cellar stairs. As he pressed himself into the dark shadows by the side of the stairs, the door above opened. The second figure carried a lamp, and by its light he recognized Marinsky, Flash Mick, and the girl in the yellow stockings. As they reached the bottom of the stairs Alonzo flashed on his torch and Marinsky spun round open-mouthed at the sight of Alonzo and the automatic pistol which showed ominously in his hand. "Good evening, Marinsky," said Alonzo quietly. "Don't move, any of you, or this gun might go off." He seated himself on an upturned barrel. "Undo those handcuffs, Flash Mick," he commanded, indicating the still trussed Lon, "and be mighty quick about it unless you want to be here when that little infernal machine of our friend Marinsky goes off." In a few moments Lon was free, and was sent upstairs in search of Bluey, who was still watching the street above. They returned in the course of a few minutes and, standing by Alonzo, regarded the sulky faces of the three plotters opposite. Alonzo lit a cigarette and passed his case to his friends. "What's the story of this bomb, Flash Mick?" he asked. "I want the truth, and if you want to save your own skin you'd better be truthful for once in your life." Flash Mick shuffled his feet uncomfortably, and with a sidelong glance at the scowling Marinsky, spoke. "We got Ferrers after he'd taken the box," he said, "but the box wasn't on him, and he wouldn't split where it was. Marinsky had him brought down here and fixed up that infernal machine in the corner. It's worked from the house at the end of the road. The girl came down here every day, and walked past the end house where I was keeping watch. I could tell by the color of her stockings whether Ferrers had split where the box was, and if I was to set off the bomb." "I see," interrupted Alonzo, "you were to explode the bomb after Ferrers had confessed where the box was." He turned to Marinsky. "So you were lying when you told me that you would release Ferrers when he told you where the ivory box was. You intended to get his secret. And instead of freeing him, Flash Mick was to blow up this house and Ferrers with it. Very pretty, I'm sure. Well, friend Marinsky, I'm going to hoist you with your own petard." He turned to Bluey. "Put those handcuffs on him, Bluey," he ordered, "and secure him to the wall. You Lon, take Flash Mick and this girl to the house at the end of the road and wait for me. Is he trussed up all right, Bluey? Good. Go with Lon." When Bluey and Lon and their prisoners had departed, Alonzo sat regarding the manacled Marinsky. Beads of perspiration had broken out on the greasy face of the captive, and he looked a picture of abject fear. "Well, Marinsky," said Alonzo, "this looks like the end of the story, doesn't it? You've had a long run, and there isn't any rotten or beastly thing which you haven't done. I've never heard anyone who had a good word for you." "Give me a chance, Mac," pleaded Marinsky. "I wouldn't do you or Ferrers or anyone any harm, you know that. Straight, I wouldn't. Give me a chance, just one more chance." Alonzo smiled, and turned away. As he walked past Marinsky, his automatic fell from his pocket almost into the hands of the other. Marinsky seized it and, taking aim at the back of the unsuspecting McTavish, pressed the trigger. Then, as Alonzo turned, still smiling, Marinsky, with a curse, threw the automatic from him. It was unloaded. "That was your chance, Marinsky," said McTavish, "your last chance." He picked up the automatic and placed it in his pocket. "I dropped it entirely for your benefit, just to see what your word was worth. You've promised Mile End an explosion, and I'm going to see that it gets one. If you hadn't tried to shoot me in the back just now, I'd have let you go. As it is," he shrugged his shoulders, and with a final glance at Marinsky, left the house. 15 minutes later Alonzo, Bluey, and Lon Ferrers drove rapidly in the direction of Aldgate. As they sped out of the Mile End Road, a muffled roar broke the stillness of the night. And police whistles sounded from the direction of Ratton Street. Alonzo, at the steering wheel, accelerated the speed of the car. "So much for Marinsky," he said with a smile. "Now for the ivory box. 06, The Unhappy Lady. As published in The Queenslander. Australia, July 3, 1926. The beauty of the moonlight was entirely lost upon Mr. McTavish as, with his hands stuck in his trouser pockets and his silk hat at its accustomed angle, he wandered slowly down Park Lane in the direction of Piccadilly and ruminated upon the hardships of life. Things had not gone well of late. An attempt to remove a diamond necklace from the strongroom of an American millionaire had resulted in complete success, with the exception that the diamonds, on examination, proved to be excellent imitations of the original necklace, which, he discovered later, was safe on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Added to which, the knowledge that the information contained in the secret diplomatic papers which he had, so assiduously, stolen from the Moravian legation, was already in the possession of the ambassador to whom he proposed selling it, did not help matters a bit. Money is always necessary to a swell cracksman and, at the moment, it was only distinguished by its absence. He stopped halfway down Park Lane and, looking over the quiet park which lay before him, considered the matter. What was to be done? The question was never answered, for at that moment there sounded on his ears the unmistakable sound of a woman crying quietly. He looked up and down Park Lane, and was, apparently, the sole occupant of the street, except for the motionless figure of a policeman near the Marble Arch end. A further search, however, revealed the fact that there was, a few paces to his left, a narrow mews, the entrance of which was obscured in the shadow, and it seemed that the sound had come from this direction. Alonzo walked quietly to the end of the narrow passage and looked round the corner. The possessor of an extremely soft heart, where the feminine sex was concerned, he could not fail to sympathize with the sight which met his gaze, for sitting on the stone steps which led to the entrance of one of the small houses attached to the mews, was a lady. Her evening cloak was wrapped close about her and a stray gleam of moonlight from the opposite end of the mews glinted on a mass of high-piled auburn hair, a wondrous sight in these days of bob and shingle, whilst the small handkerchief with which she was endeavoring to stifle her sobs obscured only a small portion of a face which was unmistakably beautiful. Alonzo removed his hat and stepped forward. The slightest suggestion of a subtle perfume greeted his nostrils as he approached the lady and he sniffed appreciatively. "You will excuse me, I know," said Alonzo, in the gentle manner especially reserved for beauty in distress, "but I heard you crying. Can I help?" The lady looked up. No, you can't, thank you very much," she murmured, endeavoring to stifle the sobs which persisted in spite of her efforts. "I hate everybody, and I'm frantically unhappy, and life is awful, but, and nobody cares." Alonzo dusted the other end of the stone step with a handkerchief, and sat down. "May I point out to you," he said, "that your last remark is absolutely untrue. I care. How can I possibly go to bed on a beautiful night like this, knowing that you are still seated on a cold stone step in Park Lane, crying? It couldn't be done. Would you like me to get you a cab and take you home?" No, I wouldn't," said the lady with a fresh outburst of sobs. "I haven't got a home, anyway. I only want to die." Experience having taught Mr. McTavish that when a lady wants to die there is usually some extremely strong reason why she should wish to continue living, he said nothing, but lit a cigarette and regarded the features of an interested cat who sat on the wall opposite. This procedure was entirely successful, inasmuch as within 2 minutes the lady's tears abated somewhat and Alonzo could see that he was being regarded with great curiosity out of the corner of her eye. "Now, what's it all about?" he asked, handing the girl his cigarette case. They sat and smoked in silence for a few minutes, then, with sudden movement, she turned to him. "If you've ever heard of Sloane Duquesne you can probably guess the rest of the story," she said. "Have you heard of him?" Alonzo smiled. "Who hasn't?" he said. "The newspapers have been full of him for days. Apparently he is a young gentleman who, at the age of 25, inherited much too much money, and appears to be addicted to drugs, drink, and every other form of nonsensical amusement. The last news of him says that his latest escapade has been to turn his sister into the streets for some entirely silly and trivial reason. Pretty hard luck on the girl," he concluded. "It is," said the girl bitterly. "You see, I happen to be his sister." Alonzo whistled quietly. "I say, that's pretty bad, isn't it? And is this stone step your only abode at the present?" he asked. "Yes," said the girl. "You see, things came to a climax today, and I really couldn't stand it any longer. I've no money, but that doesn't trouble me. I dare say I can get a job of some sort in time. But he's got my mother's diamond tiara which she gave to me. He refuses to give this up. You see, it's quite valuable, and I intended selling it, and starting some sort of business with the proceeds." "Why did you let him have it?" asked Alonzo. "I only got it from the bank the day before yesterday," she answered. "I took it down to a jeweler who knew my mother, and he arranged to give me £5,000 for it. The deal was to be completed tomorrow morning, but in the meantime he did not want the responsibility of keeping the necklace, so I asked my brother to put it in his safe. He was quite pleasant about it at the time, but in the meantime he'd had another of his attacks, and absolutely refuses to part with it. I really don't know what I shall do." She dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. Alonzo considered for a moment. "Where does your brother live?" he asked. "He lives in Brook Street, number 340, but it isn't any use. No one can move him when once he has made up his mind. I do wish I hadn't put it in the safe." "Couldn't you go there and open the safe?" Alonzo asked. She shook her head. "No. He's there all the time, and the safe is in his study on the first floor. He keeps the key in his pocket. It's a wonderful safe too, a Briggs burglar proof, and I never could get it open without having both the key and the code word which works the lock. I haven't got either," she added dismally. Alonzo smiled to himself. Briggs burglar-proof safes, whilst being excellent safes, had hitherto presented no difficulty to him. As a matter of fact he had negotiated 5 such safes during the last 2 years. He turned to the girl. "Look here, Miss Duquesne," he said. "I know your brother, I did him a good turn once, and I think he might listen to me. I'll go and see him in the morning. In the meantime I'm going to drive you to an hotel, if you'll let me, where they'll give you credit until such time and you can square up. They know me awfully well, you see," he explained. "What do you say?" She considered for a moment, then she smiled. Alonzo thought it was the most wonderful smile he had ever seen in his life. "Thanks awfully," she said. "I'll do it. If you are a friend of my brother's he might listen to you." "Thank you so much, mister." She looked questioningly at Alonzo. "My name is Umfreville O'Halloran," replied Alonzo with great promptitude, "and if you'll wait one moment I'll get a cab." Half an hour later, Miss Duquesne was comfortably installed in the Langley Hotel, Piccadilly, and Alonzo, his mind busy, hurried to the tube station, which was on the point of closing. He entered a telephone box and rang a museum number. "Is that you, Lon?" he asked. "Good. Meet me at the corner." Of Bond Street and Brook Street in an hour's time, 2 o'clock precisely. Wear evening clothes and bring the kit with you. It's a job in Brook Street, a Briggs, should take about an hour. Got that? Right, Mac, replied Lon Ferrers casually. I'll be there, and I hope it keeps fine for us. At 2 o'clock precisely Alonzo met Lon Ferrers as arranged, and relieved him of the wide belt, worn round the body under the coat, containing the tools and apparatus specially designed by McTavish for the opening of Briggs' safes. He had already inspected the premises at 340 Brook Street, which, standing on a corner formed by a narrow turning leading to a garage, presented no difficulty as to effecting an entrance. All was quiet and, with Lon keeping a lookout below, Alonzo climbed to a window on the first floor and entered the house. As he closed the window behind him it seemed that a noise came from the direction of the hall downstairs. He listened attentively for a minute, but heard no further sound, and switching on his electric torch discovered that he was in a bathroom. He opened the door and, stepping into the passage beyond, quickly found the library, the door of which was open. In the corner was the safe. He examined the massive door. Then, taking off his coat, he commenced operations, and an hour afterwards the heavy door swung open. The safe was empty except for a few books, and papers, and a black morocco leather case which rested on the second shelf. He broke the slight lock with a penknife and, opening the case, gazed at the diamond pendant which lay within. Then, with a glance at his watch he switched off his electric torch and, slipping the case into his pocket, he donned his overcoat and turned to the door. Suddenly there was a click and the room was flooded with electric light. Alonzo smiled grimly as he found himself looking down into the barrel of a heavy service revolver held by the tired-looking young gentleman in evening clothes who stood by the door. The young gentleman yawned, and sat down in an armchair, keeping McTavish covered with the revolver. "Well, Mr. Raffles," he said. "I suppose I must apologize for spoiling your evening. It was unlucky for you that I should return and hear you just at the moment that you were bringing your efforts to a successful conclusion. By the way, how did you know that the pendant was in the safe?" he asked. "Does that matter?" replied Alonzo, putting on his hat. "Would it not be more expedient to proceed to the next stage of the game, say telephoning for the police? I suppose that's rather indicated, isn't it?" The young man grinned. "Oh, I don't think so," he said. "You see, I happened to be walking down Park Lane just after midnight," his grin broadened, "and taking a look into Pharaoh's Mews I saw my delightful sister and yourself engaged in deep conversation. The rest of the story is easy. Simply putting 2 and 2 together, I conclude that my adventurous sister has engaged, or persuaded, you to remove the necklace and hand it over to her. Incidentally, I must congratulate you on the efficient way in which you have dealt with that safe. Personally, I think it was very sporting of you. When you see my sister again you might say that I sympathize with the failure of your little plot. In the meantime would you mind handing over the pendant? Thanks very much." The young gentleman replaced the pendant in the safe and shut the iron door. With his left hand he took a cigarette case from his pocket and turned to Alonzo with a smile. "Have a cigarette?" he said. "And I'd be awfully glad if you'd close the front door, behind you as you go. Thanks very much. Good night." Alonzo and Lon Ferrers walked slowly in the direction of the Criterion restaurant. Eventually, when they arrived and were seated at a table in the almost deserted, all-night restaurant, McTavish consumed cup after cup of coffee and consigned all women in distress to the nether regions. He hated to admit defeat, but, at the same time he could think of no possible way to obtain possession of the pendant. Suddenly he put down his cup and, summoning a waiter, paid the bill. Outside the restaurant, he turned to Lon. "Look here, Lon," he said. "I've made up my mind to get that pendant. I've an idea. It's risky, but I'm going to chance it. I'm going back to 340 Brook Street, and I'm going to ring the bell like an honest citizen. When somebody opens the door I'm going to stick an automatic into their ribs and walk up to the library and take that pendant. The safe isn't shut because all the lock tumblers are broken. If it comes off, I'll see you at my flat at 4 o'clock. Good night. Alonzo walked quickly in the direction of Brook Street. As he approached number 340, he could not fail to be aware of the commotion which was afoot inside and outside the house. Lights showed in every window, and the wide-open front door was guarded by the portly figure of a policeman. On the pavement outside the house stood a police sergeant and 2 more constables. Alonzo pushed his silk hat further back on his head, and rumpling his shirt front after the manner of an all-night roisterer, addressed the sergeant. "What's the excitement, officer?" he asked. "Want any help?" The sergeant grinned. "Too late, I'm afraid, sir," he said. "It's all over bar the shouting. This place has been burgled tonight, and they've got away with the Duquesne pendant. Pretty slick work, whoever they are." Alonzo said good night, and walked down Brook Street, his brain whirling. He stood for a moment on the corner of Grosvenor Square, utterly amazed. Then a suspicion of a smile broke over his face and, walking quickly to Oxford Street, he hailed a cab, and drove off rapidly to the Langley Hotel. "No, sir, Miss Duquesne isn't here," said the night clerk in answer to his question. "She left suddenly, about an hour and a half after she arrived here with you. She said you might be calling, and she asked me to give you this note." He handed a sealed envelope to Alonzo. McTavish walked out into Piccadilly, the note in his pocket. At the first street lamp he tore open the envelope and read. "Dear Mac. A pretty good bluff, wasn't it? Don't you think I acted the part of the sorrowful Miss Duquesne awfully well? I thought you'd recognize me any moment, in spite of my dyed hair. You see, we had got the key to the front door of the Duquesne house, but there's only one man in Europe can open a Briggs burglar-proof safe, and that's yourself. I knew you'd go off and crack the crib immediately. The young man who held you up was not Sloane Duquesne, but my brother, Fred. He was rather good, wasn't he? You're rather a dear, aren't you, Mac? And if you'd like to join us at Monty, I'll thank you personally. Please find enclosed banknote for £500. Buy yourself a cigarette case, or something in memory of yours, Nita Duquesne, alias Kitty Marshall." Alonzo leaned up against the lamp post and gasped. Then he roared with laughter. For the first time in his life he had been double-crossed, and by a woman. A passing policeman regarded him with amusement. "It's a fine night, sir," said the policeman. Alonzo felt in his pocket for a £1 note. "Officer 434K, he said, handing the note to the astonished police officer, "it's the finest night I've seen for a long time." So saying, Mr. McTavish adjusted his monocle in his eye and went home to bed. 07, The Mystery Blues. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, July 10, 1926. As the last notes of the violin echoed through the music hall, a thunder of applause rang through the building, and away, and recommenced as John Ackroyd, the singing fiddler, came through the curtains to take his final call. It seemed impossible to Alonzo that the tired features, the lines apparent under the stage make-up, were those of his friend, John Ackroyd. Ackroyd had been a laughing, cheerful fellow in the old days, somewhat inclined to stoutness, and Alonzo wondered what trouble or ill health had caused the great change in appearance which had undoubtedly taken place. The applause continued, and Ackroyd, bowing and smiling, prepared to play a final encore, and the house hushed into a deep quietness as the haunting melody flowed from his violin. It was a slow, mysterious blues that seemed to hypnotize the whole audience. Alonzo's eyes were riveted on the performer. Ackroyd's smile seemed very forced, and occasionally he appeared to stagger as if the strain of playing were too great. As the final notes of the violin died away, Alonzo rose, and made his way to the stage door. He nodded to the stage doorkeeper, an old acquaintance, and went upstairs to the star's dressing room. "Evening, Tom," said Alonzo to the dresser, selecting a cozy armchair. "Good evening, Mr. McTavish. It's a long time since we've seen you. Mr. Ackroyd won't he long, he hasn't been well lately, and likes to take some rest in the wings before he comes up. Strangely enough, he won't let me stay with him neither. Alonzo lit a cigarette. I thought he looked seedy from the front of the house, he said. What's wrong, Tom? I don't rightly know, sir, answered the dresser. He's been nervy-like, very irritable for about 3 months as near as I can remember. I think it was Miss Sally wanting to marry Mr. Lassalle upset him first of all. Mr. Lassalle? Queried Alonzo. I don't think you ever met him, sir, said the dresser. Clever chap, Mr. Lassalle, but evidently Mr. Ackroyd didn't think he was good enough for his sister. He's very fond of Miss Sally is Mr. Ackroyd, and he's too kind-hearted to have stepped in without good reason. I've been with Mr. Ackroyd 30 years, and I've never known him lose his temper, except with Mr. Lassalle. Alonzo smiled. 30 years is a long time, Tom. You must be very nearly a millionaire. The clothes brush slipped from his fingers, and as he stooped to pick it up, Alonzo noticed that the dresser's face had paled, and that his lips were trembling. Excuse me, sir, he said, making for the door, but I think I can hear Mr. Ackroyd coming. Almost as he spoke, Ackroyd entered the room. Surprised as he had been at his friend's changed appearance on the stage, McTavish was amazed to see him at close quarters. His face was wan and drawn, and the light of fun and mischief had gone from his eyes. He handed his fiddle to the dresser and, with a smile at Alonzo, sank wearily into a chair. Well, Mac, he said. I'm glad to see you. It's strange that you should have come tonight. I was on the point of writing you. He glanced nervously round the dressing room. I shan't want you for a bit, Tom, he said. He watched the man out of the room, then leaned closer to Alonzo. Listen, Mac, he said. There's some mysterious business going on around me. Something that I can't understand or see. I feel as if I were in a net, which is closing tighter and tighter about me each day. It sounds silly, I know, but look at me. I'm a shadow of my former self, and I've never suffered with nerves in my life. Alonzo lit another cigarette. The thought came to him that there was something almost pathetic in the appearance of his old friend. Can't you think of any explanation? He asked, eventually. Have you any enemies who might try to do you harm? I haven't an enemy in the world that I know of, replied Ackroyd. Besides, if I had, that wouldn't account for this business. He rose and walked wearily to the dressing-room door, saw that it was safely shut, and returned to his seat. 3 months ago, he said, I was as fit as a fiddle. Then, suddenly, after my performance one night, I seemed to have an indescribable feeling of nausea. I can't explain it. About the same time my health began to fail, and I dreaded coming down to the theater at night. Then I began to smell the violet scent. I couldn't get away from it. Violet scent, interrupted Alonzo. What do you mean? John Ackroyd raised his head and sniffed the close air of the dressing room. It's here now, can't you smell it? He said. Wherever I go, I smell the same odor, the scent of violets. Very faintly in the morning, but always strongly at night. He laughed nervously. I know it sounds like an old woman's tale, he said, but I've a feeling that there's a connection between this scent and my illness, whatever it may be. Alonzo sniffed the air, but he could smell nothing. He wondered for a moment if Ackroyd had developed nerves, and whether the whole story was simply the remit of a disordered imagination. He was about to ask more questions, when he noticed that the door, which had been tightly shut, was slightly ajar. Possibly an over-scented young female of the soubrette variety, he drawled, languidly, his eyes on the crack in the door. I shouldn't bother my head about it, John. Perhaps you're right, Mac, Ackroyd assented wearily, and they fell to discussing other matters. The door of the dressing-room closed silently, but not before Alonzo had caught a glimpse of the white coat of Ackroyd's dresser, Tom. About 10 minutes later Alonzo rose. I'd like to stand at the side of the stage in the next house, if you don't mind, John, he said. We'll talk about yourself again, sometime. See you later, old chap, he concluded, as he strolled out. At the end of the corridor he met Tom. "Excuse me, Mr. McTavish," said the dresser. "It's no affair of mine, but I wish you'd persuade the governor to cut out that encore piece he plays, the mystery blues he calls it." "Cut it out, Tom. Why, that's the best thing he does." Tears came into the old dresser's eyes. "I know it is, sir," he said, "but somehow he always seems worse on the nights he plays that for an encore. I hate that mystery blues. Couldn't you persuade him to cut it out, sir?" Alonzo shook his head. "I'm afraid I couldn't interfere," he said. "Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask Mr. Ackroyd for his private address whilst he is in town. Can you give it me?" "I'll write it down," the dresser answered. He pulled out a stump of pencil and wrote the address on the back of an envelope. "There you are, sir," he said as he handed the envelope to Alonzo. "Good night, Mr. McTavish." He hurried off down the corridor. Alonzo stood gazing at the back of the envelope. He had turned it over nonchalantly between his fingers, and printed on the back were the words, "The Associated Counties Life Insurance Company." He stood looking after the retreating figure of the dresser, wondering. Half an hour later Alonzo stood quietly in the prompt corner, his eyes on the stage as John Ackroyd made his entrance in the second house. Ackroyd, he thought, looked better and seemed more cheerful. The first part of the act consisted of a cello solo, then a song, and the finale, a violin number. Sally Ackroyd, her eyes on her brother, stood at the side holding his violin, ready to hand it to him when the time came. The first part of his act over, Ackroyd came to the side of the stage and took the violin and a clean handkerchief from his sister's hands. He returned to the center of the stage and, tucking the handkerchief in his collar, commenced to play. As the first notes of the violin echoed through the house, Alonzo, his eyes riveted on Ackroyd, noticed the sudden paleness of the latter's face. He felt a touch on his arm, and found Tom, the dresser, standing beside him. "Look at the governor," whispered Tom. "Do you see how his face has changed? It's that accursed mystery blues. I'll swear that's the cause of all the trouble." Alonzo was about to reply when his foot touched something. He bent down and picked it up. It was a small cork, and some instinct made him hold it to his nose. A peculiar violet smell, languid and seductive, filled his nostrils, and his mind flashed back to the remark which Ackroyd had made an hour previously, the remark about the violet scent. He quietly slipped the cork into his waistcoat pocket. "Tell Mr. Ackroyd I couldn't wait," he said to the dresser, and moved quietly to where Ackroyd's sister was standing. "Good night, Miss Sally," he whispered. "Good night, Mr. McTavish," she smiled. She held some letters towards him. "Do be nice and post these for me," she whispered. "I'd forgotten them." Once out of the theater, Alonzo made for a telephone box, and was soon connected with Lon Ferrers. "Is that you, Lon? Good. I've just left the Frivolity Music Hall. I want you to keep an eye on Tom Watson, who acts as dresser to John Ackroyd, the top of the bill, at the Frivolity. Find out what dealings he has had with the Associated Counties Life Insurance. Let me know as early as possible tomorrow morning. Good night, Lon." Next morning Alonzo found Lon Ferrers' note awaiting him on the breakfast table. "Dear Mac. Watson, Ackroyd's dresser, has drawn all his savings out of the bank. He hasn't a bean except his weekly wage. He has insured the life of John Ackroyd with the firm you mentioned for £10,000. That's all at the moment. Yours, L." Alonzo finished his breakfast and lit a pipe. A plan of campaign was beginning to shape itself in his mind. At 11:30 he went out and took a bus to Notting Hill Gate. He investigated the outside of number 17 Denman Street, taking careful note of the geography of the house, after which he returned to his flat at Earl's Court and indulged in a long conversation with Lon Ferrers. As the neighboring church clock struck 11:30, Alonzo moved out of the shadows opposite 17 Denman Street, Notting Hill Gate and, opening the iron gate, walked quietly along the strip of pathway which led to the back of the house. The place was as quiet as the grave and, as far as he could see, all the rooms at the back of the house were in complete darkness, except one on the right of the top floor, where a tiny glimmer of light showed between the blind and the window ledge. He found a door which was evidently the back entrance to the kitchen and, drawing a bunch of skeleton keys from his pocket, commenced operations. Eventually he found the right key and, opening the door, entered the house. The light of his torch showed him that he was in the kitchen. He crossed the room and found a passage, and a short flight of steps leading up to the hall. At the top of these steps he stood and listened. From somewhere above came a noise, and, sniffing the air, Alonso was certain that there was an almost imperceptible scent of violets about the place. He switched off his torch and commenced to ascend the stairs leading to the bedrooms. The noise from above became more distinct, and as he ascended the stairs to the second floor he discerned a glimmer of light coming from beneath the door of the third room along the passage. He crept along the passage and listened. From within the room came a steady grinding noise, and Alonso moved silently along the passage and entered the next room. It was a bedroom and had been slept in recently, for the bedclothes were untidy. By the moonlight which flooded through the dirty windows he saw that the room was in disorder, articles of attire and pieces of scientific apparatus being scattered about the place. A glimmer of light high upon the wall caught his eye, and a quick examination showed him that it was a ventilator between this and the next room from which the grinding noise still came. Alonso put the chair upon the bed and, standing upon it, was able to look through the ventilator into the next room. Standing in front of a long table loaded with apparatus stood a short, fat individual, who was busily engaged with a pestle and mortar, which accounted for the noise which Alonso had heard. Eventually he finished his task and poured the white powder from the bowl into a glass bottle. Then he went to a cupboard and, taking a chemist's mask from within, put it over his face. He then returned to the table and, taking another bottle, poured some liquid onto the powder. A pungent and sickly smell of violets came to Alonso, and for a moment his brain reeled. Then he quietly descended from the chair and, sitting upon the bed, considered the situation. Presently a grim smile crossed his face and, stealing quietly from the room into the passage, he halted outside the door of the next room. He had noticed that the key was in the outside of the door and he turned it quietly in the lock. Having done this, he returned to the bedroom and once more mounted the chair and looked through the ventilator. The man, an evil grin on his face, was regarding the corked bottle which stood upon the table, beside which lay the chemist's mask. Alonso quietly drew his automatic pistol from his pocket and pushed back the ventilator to its full extent. "Good evening, Mr. Lassalle," said Alonso through the ventilator. "I got your address from a letter I posted for your wife. You really should tell her not to be so trusting." Lassalle spun round, amazement written on his face. "Don't move, Lassalle," said Alonso. "I've got you covered, and if you move an inch I'll shoot you like the murdering dog you are. Put your hands on the table in front of you. Good. Now listen to me. I have just locked the door of that room from outside, and you are a prisoner. In that bottle on the table there is enough poison gas to kill a dozen men, not a particularly nice death either. Now, you are going to sit down at that table and write a full confession of the means which you and your double-faced wife have been using to encompass John Ackroyd's death. Quite a good scheme, wasn't it, for you two to get married quietly after he had refused his consent, and to commence a systematic scheme of murder, knowing that his fortune would go to her? Still more clever to blackmail old Tom Watson, whose soul you had got in your clutches, and cleverest of all when you forced him to take out that insurance policy when he had no more money to pay out. The idea of your wife putting a little of that poison on the handkerchief which John Ackroyd used each night when he played his violin solo, so that he inhaled the poison, was very neat, but not quite neat enough. It was unlucky for you that she dropped the cork from the phial, otherwise your little plot would probably have been successful. Well, Lassalle, what about it?" "It's a lie," snarled the man, his face white with fear. Alonso grinned. "A lie, is it?" he said. "Very well. If it's a lie you can prove it. I happen to be a pretty good shot. You can't get out of that room, and I'm going to fire through the ventilator and smash that bottle on the table. Then I'm going to close the ventilator, and if you're alive 10 minutes afterwards I'll confess I'm wrong." Alonzo pushed the barrel of his automatic a little further through the ventilator and took careful aim. Lassie flung himself in front of the bottle. "For God's sake don't shoot," he screamed. "I'll confess anything you like, only don't smash that bottle." His voice trailed off into a whimper. "Good," said Alonzo. "There's a pen and ink on the table. The estimable Sally, your accomplice, will be here shortly, and the police soon afterwards. I arranged that this afternoon. Now sit down and write the whole story, and when you've finished it get on a chair and pass it up to me. Incidentally, before you begin, as I see you have a telephone in that room, you can ring up the Frivolity Music Hall, and tell John Aykroyd's dresser that the mystery of the Mystery Blues is solved. 08, Chinese Music. As published in The Queenslander. Australia, July 17, 1926. Alonzo listened intently, but heard no sound except the occasional hooting of a tug as it steamed slowly up the river. Through the mist he could see the lights blinking faintly on the opposite shore. A few feet below him the river lapped against the broad piles which supported the landing stage on which he stood, and the wharf above. Behind him, at the far end of the landing stage was the basement floor of Sievert's warehouse. He made his way quietly across the platform to the warehouse door. It was locked and bolted, and a heavy iron bar, padlocked at each end, secured it effectively. That something had happened to Stevens was obvious. Alonzo thought it was improbable that he would be a prisoner in the warehouse. He was either dead or on the barge. It seemed certain that no one would have the slightest interest in Stevens before he had kept the appointment with Sievert on the Pride of Mersey, just as it was certain that a lot of people might be interested in him after he had left the barge, more especially if he had been carrying the parcel which Sievert had arranged to hand over. Alonzo sat down by the warehouse door and looked at his watch. It was 11:30, 4.5 hours after Stevens should have reported. The mist had lifted a little, and he strained his eyes to make out the outline of the barge, which, it had been arranged, should be moored in front of the landing stage, but he could see nothing. Sitting in the darkness, it seemed to Alonzo that a peculiar droning noise came from somewhere above him. He listened and, as the noise became more distinct, he recognized it. Someone was playing a Chinese reed pipe somewhere in the neighborhood and, strangely enough, the tune seemed familiar to Alonzo. He wondered who it could be, who, at this hour of the night, came to a deserted warehouse near the Isle of Dogs, and played Chinese music, and why. From the wharf above him came a shuffling noise, and he crept silently to the foot of the winding iron staircase, which led from the landing stage to the wharf. The noise became more distinct and, crouching in the shadow, he realized that the footsteps were approaching the staircase. Then the noise ceased and, looking up, Alonzo saw, silhouetted against the sky, the figure of a short and bent individual, who, with one hand on the iron balustrade, had halted in a moment at the top of the stairs, before descending. He drew back into the shadow. It seemed that the figure above him must be one of Sievert's men and, this being so, it was fairly obvious that the Pride of Mersey was somewhere in the vicinity. The man slowly descended the iron staircase. At the bottom he paused and looked round cautiously, then, apparently certain that he was alone on the landing stage, advanced in the direction of the river, Alonzo following quietly. A few feet from the edge of the landing stage the man halted and, standing behind one of the supporting piles, gazed steadfastly out into the mist. Alonzo stepped forward and touched the man upon the shoulder. "Well, my friend, and what are you looking for?" asked Alonzo. The man spun round. "Struth. It's Mr. McTavish," he gasped. Alonzo laughed quietly. "So it's you, Bluey," he said. "Where's your brother?" "That's just it," said Bluey, "where is he? I tell you, governor, I don't like this business. It fair gives me the creeps and no mistake. George got your note this morning telling him that he was to come down here to Sievert's wharf at 6:30, and that a boat would take him orf and put him aboard the barge, Pride o' Mersey, and that Sievert would and him a parcel that he was to take straight to you at Farron Street, Limehouse. Well, where is he? I tell you, George didn't like this job either. He didn't trust Sievert round the corner, George didn't, since the three of us twisted I'm over that dirty business of is 6 years ago. I shouldn't be surprised if Sievert ain't done him in, concluded Bluey ruefully. Why should Sievert do him in? Asked Alonzo. If Sievert didn't want to hand over the goods, why would he ask me to send George aboard to get them? Sievert knew jolly well that the customs had their eyes on him, and that his only hope was that George would get ashore with the goods unobserved. It was to Sievert's advantage for the job to go through. That's right enough, assented Bluey. All the same, I don't like it, Governor. There's a nasty air of mystery about this air wharf. I come down air on the hopes of bein' able to see the Pride of Mersey, and get aboard and see what'd appean to George. The larst thing he says to me was, if I ain't back by tea you can bet your boots Sievert's up to some dirty work, and you'd better come down and see where I am, that is, if I ain't already in the river. I feel George 'ad a sort of presentiment. Bluey stopped speaking and listened for a moment. I must be going crazy, he said. I could 'ave sworn I 'eard someone playin' a funny sort of tune just now. I thought I 'eard it before, too, when I was up on the wharf. They stood there silently, and it seemed that the volume of music increased gradually. They looked at each other in surprise. Where the 'ell's that music comin' from, Governor? Asked Bluey. It must be upstairs somewhere on the wharf. Alonzo led the way up the iron staircase which led to the wharf. Once upstairs they looked about them, but could see nothing. The mist was clearing, but the wharf, which was disused, was littered with old packing cases, coils of rope and spars, which cast shadows all about the place and made observation impossible. Suddenly Bluey gripped Alonzo's arm and, following the direction of the little man's finger, Alonzo saw, on the far side of the wharf, the slowly moving figure of a man. As he entered a small patch of light thrown from a nearby barge lantern, the jacket and pigtail of the Chinaman were obvious, as was the reed pipe on which he was playing. He walked slowly from the patch of light into the darkness, and the weird cadence of the music grew more faint as he moved away from the two men who stood straining their eyes after him. Listen, Bluey, Alonzo spoke quietly. He can't get off the wharf except through the warehouse door, which is locked. You go round to the right and I'll go to the left. We've got to meet him somewhere. When you do meet him, grab him. Have you got a gun? Bluey grinned and showed the blued automatic in his hand. Off you go. Bluey, said McTavish, and don't shoot unless you have 2. Try reason first. He disappeared into the darkness. Alonzo made his way cautiously round past the ground floor entrance, picking his way through the littered coils of rope and junk which lay everywhere. He stopped with a jerk as the music broke out suddenly, almost beside him. On his left and almost at the end of the warehouse wall was a pile of bales standing about 8 feet from the ground. Walking on tiptoe, Alonzo approached and, reaching the end of the warehouse, drew his automatic from his pocket and stepped round the edge of the bales. Seated on an upturned cask, his pipes across his spindly legs and his wizened yellow face wrinkled in a grin, was the Chinaman. Alonzo looked into the lined face for a moment and then slipped his automatic into his pocket. Then he drew a box beside the barrel and, sitting down, held out his hand. This is a happy meeting, Fu Chan, he said. The Chinaman smiled. The meetings of friends are always happy, he said in good English. I rejoice to meet you, my friend. Alonzo lit a cigarette, and looked into the whimsical face of the Chinaman. The inscrutable eyes told him nothing. Why do you walk about this wharf playing your pipe, Fu Chan? He asked. Often I come here in the evening and play my pipe, said Fu Chan. This place has memories for me. How long have you been here tonight? Asked Alonzo. For about 2 hours, my friend, replied the Chinaman. Alonso nodded. Fu Chan, he said, you will remember that years ago I was of service to you. Tonight a man of mine has disappeared from this wharf. He came here at 6:30 to board a barge which is called Pride of Mersey. He has disappeared. It may be that he is still on the barge, but I do not think that this is so. Fu Chan nodded his head. I do not think he is on the barge, he said. Come with me, he continued, and I will show you. Alonso followed the figure of the Chinaman round the pile of bales in the direction of the staircase. At the top he looked round the wharf. But there was no sign of Bluey, and after a moment he turned and followed the Chinaman down to the landing stage. At the bottom of the stairs they turned away from the river, and approached the basement of the warehouse. On the right of the locked door the Chinaman stopped, and Alonso saw that there was, in the wall, another smaller door, hidden in the shadows. The Chinaman pushed open the door and, stepping inside, switched on a light. They were in a small room, about 12 feet square, furnished only with a table and a chair. The Chinaman touched Alonso's arm and pointed to the left-hand corner. There, lying in a pool of blood, a Swedish knife still protruding from his heart, lay George Stevens, dead. For a moment Alonso stood regarding Fu Chan with amazement, but the Chinaman returned his gaze with his usual imperturbable smile, and Alonso turned once more to the body as it lay huddled in the corner of the room. George Stevens had not been dead long, for the body was still quite warm. Alonso walked to the door where Fu Chan stood. When did you find this, Fu Chan? He asked. About 2 hours ago, replied the Chinaman softly. I looked in, and I found him there. I do not tell anyone or do anything. It is no affair of mine. A step sounded outside, and the next moment the head of Bluey Stevens appeared round the edge of the door. His face went deathly white as his eyes fell on the body of his brother, and something like a sob sounded in his throat. Keep cool, Bluey, said Alonso. It's no use getting upset. Somebody's got George, and we've got to find out who did it. Fu Chan has been on the wharf for 2 hours, and has seen no one. Bluey Stevens stood by his brother's body, his tattered cap in his hand. I wonder who's done this. Governor, he said, between his teeth. Gord, I wish I 'ad air now, the swine. Alonso was silent. Fu Chan had gone, but from the wharf above came the sound of his weird music. McTavish looked out over the river. The fog had lifted. And off the landing stage he could see the lights of the Pride of Mersey. What the bells it all mean, said Bluey, quietly. Alonso gave no reply. The mystery seemed to grow deeper each moment and, as if in accompaniment to the scene below, the weird music of Fu Chan came from the wharf above. Suddenly McTavish spoke. It looks as if they are getting under way on the barge, he said. Bluey Stevens joined him at the door, and they watched the sudden sign of activity on the Pride of Mersey. So engrossed were they that they failed to hear the scraping noise behind them, and it was only when Sievert's hoarse laugh fell on their ears that they spun round to see him standing in front of the sliding panel in the wall. You stand still, said Sievert, raising the heavy revolver which he held in his right hand. You don't move, else the same thing happened to you as to that. He indicated the dead body in the corner. So it was you, Sievert, said Alonso. I'll get you for this, my friend. He drew out his cigarette case and lit a cigarette, his eyes fixed on the heavy face of the Norwegian. Sievert laughed loudly. You, McTavish, think I am a fool, he said. But I am not. 6 years ago you made of me a fool. Tonight I shall make of you something worse. He turned to the door as, with silent steps, Fu Chan entered the room. Tie the dogs up, Fu Chan, said Sievert. The Chinaman picked up a coil of rope from the corner of the room, and quickly bound Alonso and Bluey hand and foot. This is bad payment for a good service, said Alonso. The Chinaman smiled, but said nothing. Well, what's the next move, Sievert, said Alonso. The Norwegian laughed. I tell you, he said. There is a secret way out of this room. You two and that body will be taken downstairs through the passage. There is a little room that has a grating facing the river. When the tide comes up the grating is covered, and you will drown." Sievert laughed once more. "A very clever little plot, Sievert," said Alonso. "You knew that we would come down when George Stevens didn't turn up." Sievert grinned and pointed to Fu Chan. "To him is the credit," he said. "Do you think I have forgotten the trick you played me years ago? For nothing else but revenge on you and these two Stevens would I come again to your accursed country." He walked heavily to the sliding panel and pushed it back. "Bring them along, Fu Chan," he said, looking into the darkness below. Then Fu Chan did a strange thing. He took 2 cat-like steps and flung himself against the heavy back of the Norwegian, who, with a curse, fell down the short flight of steps leading to the passage and, before he could regain his feet, the Chinaman had flung back the panel, and secured it with an iron staple. Then, still smiling, he drew a razor from his jacket, and silently cut the ropes which bound Alonso and Bluey Stevens. Then he took a chair and opened a little grating high up in the wall. "Listen to me, Sievert," he said, his mouth to the grating. "I am, indeed, clever, for I knew that vengeance on McTavish was the only thing which would bring you back to your deserted warehouse. But McTavish is my friend, and has done me a service which I remember. Neither do I forget the little low son, my laughing daughter, whom you took away 6 years ago in your boat, and who has not come back to me. Do you remember the playing of my pipe in the olden time, O Sievert, and how I would charm a snake with my music, and how you laughed when the snake danced? Sievert, there is a snake in the room above you, but it is a different snake, and it is large and hungry. For 6 years, O Sievert, have I taught this reptile what it should do when Sievert should come back for vengeance on my friend McTavish, and, when I play my music it will come to you through the hole which I have made in the roof above you, and you shall essay to fight it, for you are a great fighter of women. Thus shall the vengeance of Fu Chan be complete." Alonso touched Bluey Stevens. And they crept from the little room and made their way across the wharf above. As they scaled the wall at the wharf end, the sound of music came softly from below. It was the music of Fu Chan. 09. The Arrest. As published in The Queenslander. Australia, July 24, 1926. Alonso, his hand stretched towards the glowing fire, regarded his midnight visitor with some amusement. "Well, Jenny," he said, "to what am I indebted for the honor of this visit? I gather it must be something important, for I imagine you do not usually pay calls at 12 o'clock at night." Jenny Marchant, otherwise known as the Lady by her own particular friends of the underworld, threw open her cloak and with deft fingers extracted a cigarette from the silver box which stood on the table at her elbow. She was beautiful after a manner of her own, Alonso thought, and, as she sat with the firelight gleaming on her bronze hair, she looked anything but one of an international gang whose activities were as clever as they were unscrupulous. She looked up at McTavish with a charming smile which was one of her greatest assets. "See here, Mac," she said, "I guess you and I understand each other pretty well. I've been working with Sharpie Alec for 5 years now, and I'm pretty wise to the fact that you and he like each other as much as a dog likes poison." She leaned forward suddenly, and her face changed. "Sharpie's turned me down, Mac," she said, "turned me down after all these years, and for some blue-eyed kid that knows as much about the game as a child of 2. It's got me pretty badly, I can tell you, and I've only got one idea in my head in coming here. I want to get back on Sharpie, and anything that I can do to get even with him and that blue-eyed cat, well, I guess I'm out to do it, and that's that." Alonso considered the ceiling with some amusement. "Do I understand, Jenny," he said eventually, "that you propose transferring your allegiance to me?" His smile broadened. "If you do, get rid of the idea. I haven't got any room for you, and, if I had, I shouldn't accept your offer. Sorry." She laughed softly. "Don't be a fool, Mac," she said. "I wouldn't work with you for $1 million a year. You're too high-flown for me, and you've got too many scruples when it comes to real dirty work. I've come to wise you up, that's all. You've been lucky, or clever, I don't know which, and you've never seen the inside of a prison, but if you're not careful you're going to qualify for a 5-year stretch. See? Alonzo whistled, quietly. Tell me more, Jenny, he said. I'm not telling you this because I'm keen on you, because I ain't, Mac, she said. But only because I want to get back on Sharpie. He's laying for you. She leaned forward and spoke more quietly. 2 months ago, as you know pretty well, Mr. Ram Singh, the confidential envoy of the Raja of Tendor, arrived from India. The Raja was broke, and this Ram Singh fellow came over to sell the dagger of Tendor, a chunk of gold set with jewels worth a king's ransom. Well, Sharpie's wise to the fact that you're after that dagger. You've been keeping Ram Singh's flat in Knightsbridge Mansions under observation, and your man, Lon Ferrers, is living in the flat above. Sharpie knows that you're going to try and get that dagger pretty soon, and you've got to be quick, that's all, for he's on the job himself tomorrow night. He'd love to put a spoke in your wheel, and he's got the whole lot ready-eyed. Skeleton keys made for the flat door, and the combination of the safe all worked out and everything. I've got 'em in my bag. Understand? I'm afraid I don't quite, murmured Alonzo. Jenny Marchant smiled. You will in a minute, she said. You've got to go and get that dagger tonight. You can have the flat keys and the safe combination. I happen to know that Ram Singh is at a dance till 2 in the morning, and there's nobody in the flat. All you've got to do is to walk round and help yourself. Of course, you can give me something for my trouble when you've pulled the job off, if you like, but if you didn't I shouldn't grumble. All I want is to get even with Sharpie. Alonzo considered the ceiling once more. Go on smoking, Jenny, he said. I'll consider the proposition. They sat in silence, the woman puffing vigorously at her cigarette, and Alonzo gazing quietly into the fire, a suspicion of a smile on his face. Suddenly the sound of a squeaky violin came from the street outside, playing an old waltz. Street sounds are common in London, and the woman took no notice, but underneath his calm exterior Alonzo had stiffened from excitement. He recognized the tune, and he realized who was playing the violin. Monkey Green, the beggar, who made a vicarious living by playing outside public houses in Limehouse, was the street musician. But why was he here, in Earl's Court? For some reason the scrape-eye music sounded like a warning to Alonzo. He strolled to the door. I'll go and give that street musician a shilling. Jenny, he said, it's impossible to think while that noise is going on outside. I'll be back in a moment. Alonzo hastened downstairs and, standing in the shadows of the main entrance, saw, on the opposite side of the street, the figure of Monkey Green, standing beneath a street lamp, his eyes on the windows of McTavish's flat. Crossing the road, McTavish handed a coin to the violinist. What is it, Monkey? He asked. Monkey Green put the fiddle beneath his arm and the coin in his pocket. Be careful, Mr. McTavish, he said in his whiny voice, read this, note, and be careful. He grinned at Alonzo and shuffled off down the street. Alonzo nodded, and, returning to the main entrance, slowly made his way up the stairs, tearing open the envelope as he did so. On the first landing he paused and hurriedly scanned the note which Monkey Green had given him. A smile crossed his face as he read the badly scrawled words. So that was the explanation of Jenny Marchant's visit. He put the note into his pocket and let himself into his flat. The woman was sitting gazing into the fire. She looked up as Alonzo approached. Well, Mac, she said. You haven't much time to decide. What are you going to do? He looked down at her and smiled. I'm going to do the job right away, Jenny, he said. If you'll hand over those keys I'll get busy. It's 12:30 now. I've got an hour and a half before Ram Singh gets home. Jenny Marchant smiled. Good for you, Mac, she said. She laid the 2 keys and a piece of paper on the table. Don't worry to show me out, Mac, she said, with a smile. Don't lose that paper, it's the combination of the safe. Good night, and good luck. Alonzo heard the door of the flat close behind her. He stood for a few minutes smiling into the fire. The situation was really very amusing. Presently he crossed to the telephone and rang up Lon Ferrers, who, according to plan, had been the occupant of the flat above Ram Singh's at Knightsbridge Mansions for some 3 weeks. This done, Alonzo slipped on an overcoat and, picking up the keys and paper, left the flat and was soon on his way to Knightsbridge. Arrived at the mansions, a glance through the glass entrance showed him that the night porter was asleep in his box. Alonzo casually pushed open the door and, stealing past the sleeper, made his way up the second floor. Here he found Lon Ferrers awaiting him. "Keep a watch from your front window, Lon," he said, "and let me know what happens." He then descended the stairs and listened for a moment outside the flat occupied by Ram Singh. All was quiet within, and, opening the door with the key supplied by Jenny Merchant, he entered silently. 15 minutes later he left the flat, and, closing the door silently behind him, whistled Lon Ferrers, who joined him on the landing. After ascertaining that the coast was clear, they crept past the still sleeping night porter, and walked quickly back to Alonzo's flat. "What's the joke, Mac?" asked Lon Ferrers as they strode along. "I saw a couple of fellows who looked suspiciously like C.I.D. men on the other side of the road whilst you were in Singh's flat, and I believe that they are following us now." Alonzo laughed, and signaled a passing taxicab. 10 minutes afterwards they were seated in his flat at Earl's Court. McTavish passed the cigarette box to Ferrers, and seated himself by the dying fire. "I had a visit from Jenny Marchant tonight, Lon," he said. "She came to me with a story that Sharpie Alec had turned her down, and that to get back on him she was handing over the keys of Ram Singh's flat, so that I could get away with the Tendor dagger before Sharpie removed it himself tomorrow night. I smelt a rat, because Jenny is quite smart enough to have removed the dagger herself. Whilst she was here I heard old Monkey Green outside. I went down ostensibly to give him a shilling, and he handed me a note and told me to be careful. Apparently there was a meeting between Sharpie Alec, Ram Singh, and Jenny down at the Apple Blossom Cafe in Limehouse 2 nights ago, and Monkey got an idea into his head that they were laying for me. Jenny Marchant is certain that I went to get that sword tonight, and probably Gretton of the Yard had been tipped the wink, and the men you saw watching were his men. If I'm not very much mistaken, we shall have a visit from the police before long. You see, they'd be fairly certain that I'd bring the sword back here with me, and the fact that it was here would be sufficient evidence for the police to get a conviction. But where is the dagger? Did you bring it back? Asked Lon, anxiously. Alonzo smiled. Not on your life, he said. There's a drain pipe outside Ram Singh's flat window, which runs down to the street level, and a good push sent the dagger down the pipe to the bottom, where it is waiting for us when we want it. What I can't understand is how Ram Singh comes in on the job. However, he stopped suddenly as the doorbell rang violently. Alonzo winked at Lon, and, going to the front door of the flat, flung it open. Outside stood Inspector Gretton and 4 plainclothesmen. Good evening, Inspector, said Alonzo, and what can I do for you? Oh, cut that stuff out, McTavish, replied Gretton. A jeweled dagger was stolen tonight from Mr. Ram Singh's flat in Knightsbridge. It's on these premises. It looks as if we've got you this time, McTavish, and I want you to tell us straight away where the dagger is. Alonzo smiled. Really, I don't know what you are talking about. But if, of course, you are certain that there is a dagger here, why you'd better look for it. He seated himself down once more, and smilingly watched the 5 C.I.D. men turning the place upside down in their endeavors to find the dagger. Every room in the place was ransacked thoroughly, and it was only after 2 hours' hard work that, finding their endeavors of no avail, 5 perspiring C.I.D. men mopped their brows and looked at each other. Well, Inspector, said Alonzo. Are you satisfied that that dagger isn't here? I could have told you that 2 hours ago, only you wouldn't have believed me. Of course, if you really want to know where the dagger is, and you like to ask me really nicely, I might tell you. Inspector Gretton grinned wearily. "I must say you've got a nerve, McTavish," he said. "We had absolute information that the dagger was here, and that you had taken it within the last 3 hours from Ram Singh's flat in Knightsbridge." Alonzo laughed. "Listen to me, Gretton," he said. "You've been trying to get me for years, and you haven't succeeded yet. Take a tip from me and give up trying. You've been double-crossed, and in your very praiseworthy endeavor to get a conviction against me you've played right into the hands of a bunch of clever crooks. Mr. Ram Singh has reported to you that the Tendor dagger was stolen within the last 3 hours, and I'll bet that Sharpie Alec gave you the unasked-for information that I had done the job. Now I suggest that you go home to bed, and if you will be at your office at the Yard at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning I'll tell you just when and where you can lay your hands on that sword." The inspector picked up his hat. "You're a clever devil, McTavish," he said ruefully. "I ought to have known that you wouldn't be fool enough to have the goods on you. However, I shall be at my office at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Good night." "Good night, Inspector," said Alonzo, "and better luck next time." The next morning, at 10 o'clock, Mr. Alonzo McTavish, having hurried from Scotland Yard, walked into the office of an insurance company in Cornhill and asked to see the general manager. 2 minutes afterwards he was seated in the private office of that individual. Alonzo stated his business quickly. "I have reason to believe," he said, "that you have this morning received a claim for payment of a large sum of money on the policy on the Tendor dagger, which was insured in your office by Mr. Ram Singh. The dagger was stolen last night, and Mr. Ram Singh informed Scotland Yard early this morning." Alonzo leaned over the manager's desk. "Do you know," he said, "I rather think I know where that dagger is." The general manager looked surprised. "Well, Mr. McTavish," he said, with a glance at Alonzo's card, which lay on the table before him, "it would be well worth your while to place your information in the hands of the police. This notice is just going out to the papers." He handed a typewritten slip to Alonzo, which stated that the insurance company would pay a reward of £1,000 to anyone who supplied information leading to the recovery of the Tendor dagger. Alonzo put the slip in his pockets and, leaving the office, returned to his flat to await developments. About the same time, a page boy at the Hotel Splendide, at which hotel Miss Jenny Marchant was staying, handed in at her apartment a large bunch of red roses, which had been left a few minutes previously by a gentleman who had left no name or message. As she held the bouquet to her nose the telephone bell rang. Miss Marchant went to the instrument. "Hello, Jenny," said Alonzo's voice, "I hope you like your flowers. Better luck next time." She heard the click as the receiver was hung up. Miss Marchant, with an expression which belied the prettiness of her mouth, flung the bunch of roses against the wall. As the flowers struck the wall the wire which bound them burst, and something fell to the floor. A gasp of amazement broke from her. There, gleaming on the floor, in the bright sunlight, lay the dagger of Tendor. She picked it up and stood, wondering. Before she had recovered from her surprise, the door burst open, and Inspector Gretton and 2 plainclothesmen entered. His eyes fell on the dagger in her hand. "Well, Jenny," he said. "We've been waiting in the lounge for an hour to get you with the goods on you. McTavish told us you had the dagger, and that you and Sharpie Alec tried to lay for him. It looks to me like you returned the compliment." "It's not true," she gasped. "I know nothing of this dagger. It's just arrived in that bunch of roses. McTavish has planted it on me." "You tell that to the Marines," said the inspector. "McTavish told me 2 hours ago that you had the sword, and what your little game was. It's no good trying to bluff, Jenny. Sharpie Alec has confessed that you tried to switch it on to McTavish. Get your things on, my girl, you're for it this time." 1 hour afterwards Mr. Alonzo McTavish strolled out of the general manager's office in the city. In his pocket was a check for £1,000 for information received, and his face was wreathed in an extremely self-satisfied smile. 10. The Black Mantia. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, July 31, 1926. Mr. Cyrus K. Legit took not the slightest notice of Alonzo's remark, but continued gazing with steadfast eyes in the direction of Cranford Towers, chewing the end of his long black cigar in a ruminative manner. Alonzo, looking in the opposite direction, regarded the sunset with equanimity. As he had previously remarked, the sunset was beautiful, as indeed was the whole scene which lay below them. To their left in the valley was the beautiful park surrounding Cranford Towers, whilst below the little hill on which they were seated, the white country road ran from the distant village of Cranford, and wound like a white ribbon on its way to Kelthorpe. Mr. Leggett removed his cigar, and spat reflectively. "Say, McTavish," he drawled, "I guess I'm not entering into any argument with you about the sunset or any other fixin's of your derned English climate. If you think I've come all the way across the Atlantic to this one-eyed spot, miles and miles from New York, or any other civilized city, for the purpose of admirin' your weather, you're wrong." "What's worrying you, Cyrus?" asked Alonzo. Mr. Leggett expectorated once more with great precision. "Just this," he said, "how are we goin' to get that derned picture away from the house?" He pointed in the direction of Cranford Towers. "It's one thing to cut a Velasquez out of its frame, and another to hike it across the countryside." He turned to Alonzo with a grin. "Say, even your nippy rural police would ask questions if they saw us carrying an $80,000 picture along a country road, wouldn't they?" "Don't worry," replied Alonzo. "I've fixed all that. The Count, Bluey Stevens, Mousie and Carrie, are living in that farmhouse away to the right of the towers. They're supposed to be students taking a vacation, and if Bluey doesn't talk too much the farmhouse people might believe them. They've got a car over in the garage in Kelthorpe, and when we've cut the picture all we have to do is to get it to the park gates, where they will meet us. We'll have that Velasquez in London ready for shipment in no time. The whole thing's easy," concluded Alonzo, screwing his green eyeglass into his eye with a nonchalant air. "Sure thing," agreed Mr. Leggett, throwing the cigar stump away and substituting a piece of chewing gum. "You're a clever crook, McTavish, and, if you ever come over my side of the Atlantic I'll be tickled to death to work with you." He rose to his feet and brushed his immaculate flannel trousers. "We'd better be moving, McTavish," he said, "if we're going to make Cranford in time for dinner." They descended the hill slowly and, to the casual observer, the two slim, well-dressed figures might have been those of a country gentleman and an American friend instead of two of the cleverest swell cracksmen in Europe. They stepped out along the road in silence, each busy with thoughts of the job in hand. So engrossed were they that they hardly noticed the big touring car which sped along towards them, and it was only when Leggett shouted that Alonzo jumped for the side of the road, narrowly escaping the car which tore past them. "Darned impertinence," said Leggett, but Alonzo did not reply, for he was gazing at something which he had caught, something flung from the window of the car as he had jumped aside, a black lace mantilla. The mantilla had been rolled into a ball, and as Alonzo shook out its folds a crumpled piece of paper fell onto the road at his feet. He stooped and picked it up, and an exclamation escaped him as he read the one word scrawled on it in pencil, "Help." "Say now," drawled Cyrus Leggett, looking over Alonzo's shoulder. "What's all that about?" Alonzo gazed after the automobile, which was by now a mere speck in the distance. As the car had sped past him he had caught a momentary glimpse of the white face of the girl seated in the corner, the girl who had flung the mantilla. "Look here, Leggett," he said quietly. "We've got to stop that car." Leggett grinned. "Vol, I don't know how you're going to do it," he said, but Alonzo was already running down the road towards Cranford, and with a sigh, the American started off in pursuit. After running 100 yards Alonzo's scheme became apparent to the panting Leggett. On the Cranford road was a small branch turning, and at the apex stood the telephone box of an Scout. The man was standing by the box and touched his hat as Alonzo appeared. "Look here," said McTavish, "I believe this is the only road to Kelthorpe." "Isn't that so?" "That's right, sir," said the man. "It's a straight run of about 12 miles, with no side roads." "Good," said Alonzo. "Is there a constable in Kelthorpe?" The man grinned. "There is, sir," he said. "I know him well. I've got his telephone number if you want it." A moment later Alonzo was speaking to the village constable in Kelthorpe. "See here, officer," said Alonzo. "My car's been stolen and the people who went off with it should be passing through your village in a few minutes. Just stop the car and hold them up till I get there, will you?" "That I will, sir," came the voice of the constable from the other end. "I'll hold them up all right, and you get along as soon as you can." A few minutes later, McTavish, with Leggett seated on the carrier, drove the Scout's motor bicycle rapidly in the direction of Kelthorpe. As they bumped down the country road, Leggett, who was particular as to his mode of traveling, sighed heavily. "Say," he drawled, endeavoring to insert a piece of chewing gum into his mouth. "Say, McTavish, you've got a nerve, I'll tell the world." When McTavish and Leggett entered the single street which constituted Kelthorpe, they saw that the village constable had been as good as his word, and the touring car was drawn up on the left of the road outside his cottage. The three men stood arguing with the constable a little further away, and the girl appeared to be taking little interest in the conversation. McTavish stopped the motor bicycle and, as arranged, Cyrus Leggett, chewing busily, swaggered jauntily down the street until he reached the waiting group, and in 2 minutes was immersed in a wonderful argument with the village constable and the three men, and so successfully did the enterprising Leggett conduct his side of the business that Alonzo, standing at the top of a side turning, was able to signal to the girl, who, after a momentary pause, and with a disinterested glance at the group, walked slowly up the road and joined Alonzo. He raised his cap and produced the black mantilla from his pocket. "This is yours, I believe," he said. "I found this piece of paper inside it. Did you write it?" The girl looked him steadily in the eyes. "Yes, I did," she said softly, and a smile brought 2 dimples to her cheeks. "You didn't lose much time in answering my appeal," she said, with a whimsical glance at the still arguing group in the village street. Alonzo smiled. "Adventure is always acceptable," he said. "What's wrong?" A frown chased the smile from the girl's face. "Just this," she said. "In a month's time I inherit Cranford Towers. I am Marion Cranford. Mr. Steen, my guardian, the stout man," she pointed to the group by the ear, "has not been very careful in the management of the estate, I am afraid," she smiled ruefully, "and I believe is in difficulties with regard to the account which he has to render me next month when I come of age. 2 days ago he informed me that it was necessary to sell the Velasquez picture, for which the Towers is famous, and which has been in my family for many years. He told me that the sale had been arranged and that the picture was practically sold. The other 2 men are the dealers who have come down to see the picture. They are Americans, and I dislike them both intensely. I've tried to get away from the Towers, and see if the solicitors can do something to stop the deal going through, but I'm afraid there isn't time, and I'd hate any sort of publicity, besides which I'm practically a prisoner in the house at the moment. I just didn't know what to do, and when I saw you walking along the road you looked like the sort of man who would help." Alonzo smiled his thanks for the compliment. It seemed that several people had their eyes on the Cranford Velasquez at the moment besides himself and Cyrus K. Leggett. He glanced towards the car. Leggett seemed to be apologizing profusely to everybody, and Alonzo realized that his interview with the girl must end. "You'll have to be rejoining your guardian Miss Cranford," he said. "Otherwise he may suspect. Please don't worry about the Velasquez. I rather fancy that I shall be able to keep an eye on that for you. You see, my friend and myself happen to be collectors of pictures, and we are naturally interested in the safety of the Velasquez." He held out his hand. "I feel we shall meet again, Miss Cranford," he said smilingly. They shook hands. "I'm so glad I threw you the note," she said with a smile. "Somehow I feel more safe now. Goodbye." Alonzo watched her as she walked across the street and rejoined the party with the car. Cyrus K. Leggett stood hat in hand as the automobile moved off, and then joined Alonzo, grinning rather ruefully. "I've had a jewel of a time, Beau," he said, as they walked to the spot where the motor bicycle stood. Anyway, I told M eventually that I'd made a mistake, and that the car was a similar color and make to my own. He chewed reflectively for a moment. Say, Mac, he continued. Do you know who the two guys were, the tall thin one and the little one standin' with him? You don't? Well, I guess they're the biggest pair of receivers of stolen pictures that ever kept out of prison. What they're doin' over in this quarter of the universe I don't know, but I could make a couple of guesses that it's got something to do with the Cranford Velasquez. Larry Single and Dippy Sourman are their monikers, and practically every big picture that's pinched in America goes to them eventually to dispose of. I guess Larry Single is talking a holiday over here till that little business of the Rembrandt that disappeared from the New York Museum has blown over. I thought for a moment that they'd remember me, but they didn't. Darned funny, the world's a small place, ain't it? Alonzo did not reply. He was deep in thought, and as the motor bicycle sped back to the crossroads he reflected on the situation. After handing over the bicycle to its rightful owner, together with a generous tip, they started off on their long walk back to the inn at Cranford. Mr. Leggett, after a glance at Alonzo's knit brows, came to the conclusion that silence was a virtue, and consumed chewing gum in silence. It was after they had consumed their supper that Alonzo broke into a roar of laughter. Leggett, who was admiring the beauties of the moonlight from the window, looked round in amazement. Say, he grinned. I thought you'd gone dumb. What's hit you? Leggett, replied Alonzo. I've got an idea for fixing this Velasquez business. For once we're going to be on the side of law and order. Tell me what you think of it. He unfolded his plan, and a few minutes later two farm laborers passing the inn regarded with amusement the contortions of Mr. Leggett as he roared with laughter at the window. Say, Mac, he gasped admiringly, the tears running down his face. I always thought you had a brain. You've got the goods. There's only one thing wrong with you. You ought to be an American. 2 nights afterwards, at midnight, a dark shadow crossed the lawn in the rear of Cranford Towers and, reaching the side entrance to the house, proceeded to pick the look. Then, with a cautious glance round, the shadow, which was Mr. Alonzo McTavish, entered, quietly closing the door behind him. Once inside, he ascended quietly to the first floor and, catching sight of a gleam of light showing under a door, listened for a moment, and recognized the voice of Steen, who was talking rapidly in low tones. Presently other voices joined in the conversation, which voices, Alonzo concluded, belonged to Single and Sourman. Then he made his way silently along the corridor, turning into the narrow passage which led to the picture gallery. He entered the right wing of the gallery and, finding a chair, sat silently in the darkness. It was only when the clock struck 12:30 that he commenced to make himself heard. First he scraped the chair along the floor, quietly, then a little more loudly, and eventually dropped it on the floor with a crash. A moment afterwards a light flashed on in the gallery, and Alonzo, simulating surprise, turned to find himself facing Steen, Single, and Sourman. Single held a revolver in his hand, with which he covered Alonzo. He whistled as he recognized McTavish. So that was the game, eh? He sneered. He turned to his companions. This was the fellow who was with the chap who held the car up the other day, he said. Can't you see the game? They're after the Velasquez. Say, you've come to the wrong side of the gallery, you mug, he grinned, and you'll be on the wrong side of a police cell tomorrow morning, too. Shall I? Queried Alonzo pleasantly. Well, you won't send me there, Larry Single, or your friend Sourman, or even our esteemed guardian, Steen. Single started as Alonzo mentioned his name. Look here, what's the game? He said. Simply this, replied Alonzo. I know all about your little scheme with regard to the Velasquez. Mr. Steen, he bowed ironically, sells you the Velasquez as Miss Cranford's guardian for a nominal sum, say, £5,000. You resell it in America for its value, which is about 6 times as much, and split the difference. Extremely clever. Well, the point is that unless I come in on the deal I'll queer your pitch. I rather fancy the New York police might like to know your whereabouts, Single, and Miss Cranford's lawyers might like to know some interesting things about you, Steen. Well, what do I get? 15 minutes afterwards Alonzo left Cranford Towers with £3,000 in English and American notes in his pocket and a self-satisfied smile on his face. Up in the picture gallery, where he had left them, Messrs. Steen, Single, and Sowerman discussed the situation. "Oh, it's all for the best," said Single morosely. "The only thing we could do was to buy him off, otherwise he'd have spoiled everything. Say, let's talk tomorrow morning, I'm tired and," he broke off abruptly as a disheveled manservant entered the gallery. "Mr. Steen, sir," said the man breathlessly, "the Velasquez." "Well, what about it?" snapped Steen. "It's gone, sir," said the man. "I walked through the other side of the gallery a minute ago. The frame's empty, and the picture's gone." Single jumped from his chair as if he had been shot. "Curse him," he exclaimed. "Don't you see the game? We've been sold. While we were sitting here talking to that guy his pals were on the other side of the gallery cutting the picture out. Oh, hell." At the inn in Cranford, Alonzo, busy at the writing table, read the letter which he had just written. Cyrus K. Leggett, looking over his shoulder, grinned broadly as he read. "Dear Miss Cranford, the Velasquez is on its way to London, and is perfectly safe with me until such time as you come of age and ask for it. If you want it sold let me know, and I will arrange for this on the usual 10% commission. Remember me kindly to your esteemed guardian. Sincerely yours, Alonzo McTavish." Mr. Leggett sighed. "Say, Mac," he said. "Do you think she'll ask us over to tea?" Alonzo adjusted his eyeglass. "I am perfectly certain she will, Cyrus," he said, "but you will not accept the invitation. Two's company, you know." 11. The House with the Glass Roof. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, August 14, 1926. The wind shrieked and whistled across the house tops, and the pattering of the rain formed a melancholy accompaniment. Alonzo, wet to the skin, and huddled against the lee side of a chimney stack, made rude remarks about the English climate, and cursed his selection of such an inclement night. He knew that Lon Ferrers, engaged on the same business as himself, was taking shelter somewhere in the vicinity, but where, he had not the slightest idea. To move was dangerous, for it was impossible to distinguish where one parapet ended and another began, and one false step meant a drop of 60 or 70 feet. Alonzo wondered whether Lon had been more lucky in the business on hand, and had succeeded in finding the roof of the house, through which, 3 nights later, they had planned to effect their entrance. Alonzo had not the faintest idea where the roof of number 16 was, for they had twisted and turned so many times in the darkness that, besides getting separated, he had lost all sense of direction. He sat down behind the chimney stack and lit a cigarette. The only thing to do was to wait for the rain to stop and the passing of the black cloud which obscured the moon. He felt in his pocket and produced Bluey Stevens' note. Bluey Stevens, a friend and colleague, had unfortunately fallen into the hands of the guardians of law and order whilst essaying the very business which Alonzo and Lon Ferrers were now attempting, but had managed to get the note conveyed to Alonzo. McTavish opened his raincoat and, holding the note within the shelter of the coat, switched on his electric torch and read. Dear Mac. Number 16 Felsham Gardens. Get through the roof. This is easy. Through studio and passage. Right-hand room. Cedar wood box in bottom drawer of escritoire. Be careful of the brothers. They'll stick at nothing. You can recognize roof by 3 gray chimney stacks. Bluey. Alonzo put the note back in his pocket. It was now possible to see a little way and, stepping gingerly, he commenced his search for the 3 gray chimney stacks. He had been progressing slowly along the roof for some 20 minutes when he first noticed the light. The light was diffused as if behind a frosted glass, and it seemed to shine from several different places, within a square of about 40 feet, on a nearby roof. Alonso, his hand on the butt of his automatic, approached carefully. A quick examination showed him that the light came from a square roof which was enclosed by a low wall about 4 feet high. Peering over the wall he saw that the light came through the roof in patches, and a further examination showed him the reason. The roof was made of frosted glass, and beneath this glass was stretched a cover intended to prevent the light from showing through the roof. The cover, however, was torn in places, and patches of light showed through the frosted glass. Alonso looked up and saw, almost in front of him on the other side of the parapet which surrounded the roof, the 3 gray chimney stacks. He had found number 16. He made his way round the roof with the intention of examining the 3 gray chimney stacks. He had hardly reached the end of the wall when he heard a scraping sound, and dropped to his knees behind the cover of the wall. Sliding down the sloping roof of the next house was the figure of a man. For one moment, Alonso thought it was Lon Ferrers, but as the figure entered a patch of moonlight he saw that he was mistaken. The man approaching was tall and thin. He was wearing a black sombrero hat, which, with a black beard, added to his mysterious appearance. He slid carefully down the side of the roof and disappeared from view, reappearing a second later on the other side of the glass roof. Alonso, bent double, and keeping under cover of the wall, hurried round the glass roof in the direction of the mysterious stranger. The bearded man in the black hat seemed familiar with the geography of the neighboring roofs, and an idea came to Alonso that this same individual might know the secret of the glass roof. He reached the end of the wall and, peering cautiously round, saw the figure of the man by the side of the 3 chimney stacks. He was looking over the edge of the wall, and appeared to be searching for something. After a moment he vaulted onto the wall, and Alonso, quietly approaching, saw that the man was lying full length on the wall with his left hand stretched down over the edge of the parapet. Alonso rose to his full height and, stepping quietly forward, pushed the barrel of his automatic against the back of the man's neck. "Don't move, please," said Alonso, "otherwise you might become a casualty. Just get off that wall quietly and come and hold a conversation with me beneath the shade of the chimney stack." The man scrambled off the wall. For a moment Alonso thought that he was going to show fight, but, after a glance at McTavish's automatic, he seemed to think better of it, and seated himself sulkily by the side of the chimney stacks. Alonso leaned up against the wall. "Well, my friend, what is the secret of the glass roof?" he asked. The man regarded him in silence for a moment, and then shook his head. "Ah," said Alonso, "I see. You don't speak English. Well, that saves a lot of argument. Just hold out your hand, will you? Like that. That's right." 5 minutes later the mysterious individual with the black beard, bound hand and foot, and with his own handkerchief stuffed in his mouth, lay in the shadow of the chimney stack. This important business over, Alonso, lying upon the wall, examined the roof below him. Reaching down his left hand he came in contact with a handle affixed to the wall. He seized the handle and pulled it towards him. As he did so a portion of the glass roof below him opened, disclosing a flight of steps loading down into the darkness, and, with a final glance at his captive, Alonso let himself gently over the edge of the wall, and commenced to descend into the darkness. Soon his feet touched the floor beneath the glass roof which, he imagined, must be the studio referred to in Bluey's note. The next thing was to find the passage and the room which contained the cedar wood box. He stood silently in the middle of the big studio and listened. He could hear no definite sound, but from somewhere in the vicinity there seemed to come a low droning noise as if someone was speaking in a continuous monotone. He switched on his electric torch and flashed it about him. The room in which he stood was sparsely furnished, with only a chair or table here and there to accentuate its bareness. At the far end was an oak door and, switching off his torch, Alonso approached this door and tried it. It was unlocked, and he passed through into a long oak-paneled passage lighted only by a single electric lamp set in a frosted shade. At the end of this passage and facing him were two doors similar to the one through which he had just entered. These, he imagined, were the doors of the two rooms mentioned in Bluey's note. As he stood motionless, the droning noise, which he had first heard in the studio, recommenced, but this time it sounded nearer. He commenced to creep along the passage, but had hardly taken 3 steps, when the dim light set in the roof of the passage went out, leaving him in complete darkness. He moved forward again, but stopped after a dozen steps and listened once more. He seemed to be approaching the noise, which appeared to be caused by some low and deep voice speaking slowly and quietly. Strangely enough, the sound of the voice came from somewhere at his left elbow, and he realized that the wall on the left of the passage contained some secret chamber. He switched on his torch, placing his fingers over the bulb, so that only a tiny streak of light showed, and commenced to examine the wall. To all outward appearance it was an ordinary oak-paneled wall, and he could find no sign of a secret spring or of any other means of obtaining entrance to the room beyond. Suddenly he switched off the torch and flattened himself against the wall. At the far end of the passage on the left, the oak-paneled wall had commenced to move slowly towards him, leaving an opening about 3 feet wide through which a bright beam of light flowed into the passage. The wall stopped moving, and through the aperture came a strange figure, dressed in a long black monk's gown, but with a white cowl which completely covered the face and head. Once in the passage the figure turned and, pressing a spring in the opposite wall, closed the opening behind him, but not before Alonso had heard a voice speaking in the secret chamber, a voice which he knew almost as well as his own, that of Lon Ferrers. The explanation came to him in a flash, and a piece of Bluey's note was explained: "Be careful of the brothers. They'll stick at nothing." The white-cowled figure which was now approaching towards him in the darkness was evidently a member of some secret brotherhood. Lon Ferrers had found number 16, and discovered the secret of the glass roof, before Alonso had arrived, and had been captured. Alonso held his breath. The figure in the black gown passed by him so closely that one of the flowing sleeves touches his arm. Quick as a flash Alonso made up his mind, and followed the figure in the direction of the studio door. The man in the white cowl passed through the door and left it slightly ajar. Alonso, looking through the crack in the door, saw that the man had switched on the light and was engaged at a cupboard on the opposite side of the room. Years of experience had taught Alonso that the most efficacious method of keeping an adversary quiet was chloroform, and he seldom started on any expedition without a small bottle of the drug in his pocket. He drew out the bottle and, soaking his handkerchief with chloroform, quietly waited in the dark passage by the studio door. After a moment the hooded figure finished his business at the cupboard and, closing it, crossed the room. As the black-gowned arm went up to switch off the electric light, Alonso stepped forward and, seizing the man round the waist with his left hand, pressed the drug-soaked handkerchief over the white cowl. The man struggled violently, but the chloroform soaked quickly through the linen cowl, and after a moment the black-gowned figure hung limply in Alonso's arms. McTavish dragged the limp figure to a corner of the studio and laid it upon the floor. He pulled the cowl off and flashed his torch on the face of the unconscious man. The facial muscles had relaxed under the influence of the chloroform, and the man's mouth hung open, and Alonso stifled an exclamation of surprise as he saw that the man's tongue had been cut out at the roots. He switched off the torch and stood for a moment undecided as to his next move. He wondered why the tongue of the unconscious man had been removed. Was this one of the methods of the brothers who would stick at nothing, of obtaining silence? The very thought gave him an idea. He stripped off the gown and cowl from the man and, in a moment, wearing the strange garb of the brotherhood, Alonso crept back quietly along the passage until he reached the 2 doors at the end. He found the right-hand door unlocked and, entering, switched on his torch and searched the escritoire mentioned in Bluey's note. In the bottom drawer he found the cedar box. He opened it, and to his surprise found merely an ordinary envelope inside. He tore this open and read: 2nd, 11:30. Brother will divulge as directed. Was this the quarry for which Bluey had risked so much? He read the note again and suddenly a possible meaning came into his head. That day was the 2nd day of the 2nd month, and the time of his entrance into the studio approximately 11:30. Was it possible that the man who he had bound and gagged on the roof was the brother who would divulge? He slipped the envelope into his pocket and left the room. In the passage he could still hear the droning noise, and could occasionally distinguish the tones of Lon Ferrer's voice. He hurried up the passage, crossed the studio, and climbed the ladder rapidly to the trapdoor in the glass roof. Then, scrambling over the low wall, he conducted a hurried search of the bearded man's pockets. 15 minutes afterwards Alonzo scrambled down the ladder to the studio floor and, hurrying down the passages, searched for the spring which the black-gowned brother had used to open that secret panel. At last he found it, a small button high up on the opposite wall. He pressed this button, and as the panel commenced to open he pulled the cowl closer about his face, and with his automatic concealed in the voluminous sleeve of his gown, stepped through the opening and entered the secret room. Seated round a table were 10 men. They were all dressed in black gowns with white hoods. At the top of the table one of the mysterious figures was standing and, at the bottom, his hands manacled, stood Lon Ferrers. The standing figure addressed Alonzo. "You have been a long time, brother," he said. "Has our absent brother arrived?" Alonzo shook his head. "He should be here at any moment," continued the standing figure. "Brothers, it is obvious that this meeting place is known, and arrangements have been made to transfer our headquarters. Instructions should have arrived ere now." He spoke to Lon Ferrers. "For the safety of this brotherhood it is necessary that you die," he said. He turned to Alonzo. "Brother, take this man away and carry out the sentence, and report when you have done so." Alonzo was hardly able to conceal his elation. He took Lon Ferrers by the arm and led him through the secret panel, which he closed after him. A few seconds sufficed to cut Ferrers' bonds, then McTavish, throwing off his gown and hood, led his amazed companion through the studio door and, closing it, commenced piling all the furniture he could find against it. In a few minutes, with Lon's assistance, the door was securely barred, and they mounted the ladder and made their way to the roof unhindered. Seated on an adjoining roof they listened to the sounds of banging which came from the street below. "It's all right, Lon," said Alonzo, in answer to his companion's inquiring glance. "These fellows are part of an anarchistic brotherhood. I managed to capture one of their fellows who was on his way with warning of a police raid, which is apparently going strong at the moment. That accounts for the noise downstairs, and as we have cut off their retreat, it looks as if they are for it. We'll wait here until the coast is clear." Ferrers nodded, and helped himself to a cigarette from Alonzo's case. "I say, Mac," he said eventually, "what was in the cedarwood box?" "Nothing," replied Alonzo, "except a message that the brother who was coming here tonight would divulge." He did. He divulged where the treasure was, the stuff that poor old Bluey had wind of. It consisted of a packet of bank notes with which these gentlemen were going to make their getaway. They were in our bearded friend's pocket. They're much safer now I've got them. A gust of wind shrieked over the housetops and Alonzo caught his hat just in time. "It's an ill wind that blows nobody any good," he quoted. "Let's go home." 12. Alonzo, Sportsman. As published in The Queenslander, Australia, August 21, 1926. Mr. Alonzo McTavish, clad in a brilliantly hued dressing gown, smoking a large briar pipe, and surrounded by newspapers of every size and description, gazed into the fire and endeavored to formulate some definite plan of action. The abilities of the detectives who were watching the wedding presents at the Heckenheimer house, in Park Lane, were an unknown quantity to Alonzo. He had an idea that Mr. Dirk K. Heckenheimer would spare no expense in looking after his daughter's property. The job presented itself to Alonzo as a matter of simple burglary, and simple burglary did not appeal to him in the slightest. A swell cracksman of the highest order, his gifts had been devoted to the use of the brain more than that of a burglar's tool kit, and the idea of breaking into the Park Lane house did not appeal to him at all. Yet, at the moment, that method appeared to be the only one by which he could become possessed of the pearl necklace. He picked up the newspaper which he had last read, and turned to the paragraph describing the gifts. Foremost amongst the gifts of jewelry to the prospective bride is the wonderful pearl necklace presented by Mr. Cyrus J. Swaffer, the millionaire friend of the bride's father. The necklace consists of no less than 120 superbly matched pearls, and is valued at £10,000. The wedding of Miss Heckenheimer and Sir John Haversley is to take place next Monday. Admission to view the presents is by ticket only. Alonso smiled at the last sentence. He had viewed the necklace on 3 separate occasions by means of forged tickets, but he had had little opportunity of making himself acquainted with the geography of the house, except the opportunity of noticing which windows gave access to the ground-floor dining room, in which the presents were on view. The telephone bell disturbed his thoughts. He took off the receiver and recognized the voice of Jim Maitland, who had the Heckenheimer house under observation. "Hello, Mac," said Maitland. "You'll have to look slippy if you want that necklace. A few minutes ago I was having a drink at the Green Man on the corner of Sellers Mews, and one of the Heckenheimer servants came in and said that the old man had been warned that an attempt might be made on the goods, and that the presents are being moved tomorrow. I'll ring again if I hear anything else. So long, Mac." McTavish hung up the receiver with a grin. The difficulties were apparently increasing. One thing was certain. If the job was to be done at all, it must be done immediately. He looked at his watch. It was 11:30. Alonso imagined that the keenest detective might begin to feel tired somewhere about midnight, especially after the tempting supper which Mr. Heckenheimer's butler was certain to supply. He threw off his dressing gown and changed into a lounge suit and a pair of brown, rubber-soled shoes. Then, slipping an electric torch into his pocket, he left the flat and walked quickly in the direction of Park Lane. As he walked, he rehearsed in his mind the method which he had decided to adopt. It was fairly certain that there would be at least one detective in the ground-floor dining room, where the presents were on show. The other detectives would be stationed in different parts of the house, or would be off duty. With a detective inside, it would be impossible to effect an entrance through the dining room window. The front door was out of the question, as Maitland had discovered that it was not only locked, but barred and chained as well. It seemed to Alonso that it would be necessary for him to make his entrance through one of the upper windows of the house and, after spying out the land, await or make some opportunity of getting into the dining room. He wondered what Maitland meant by saying that someone had warned the old man that there might be an attempt on the goods. It would be amusing, thought McTavish, if some rival collector of unconsidered trifles was also on the war path. Tonight being the last night, it stood to reason that any attempt would, more or less, synchronize with his own, and might possibly add a little more excitement to the night's amusement. He entered Park Lane from the Piccadilly end and approached the Heckenheimer house from the rear, through a mews which stood at the back of the house. The coast was clear and he quickly scaled the wall which separated the house from the turning leading to the mews and, dropping down on the other side, stood silently, listening. From the other side of the wall, somewhere in the mews, he could hear soft footsteps and, as he stood undecided, a soft whistle sounded on the stillness of the night air. There was silence for a moment, then the whistle was repeated. But this time the sound came from above him. Someone in the Heckenheimer house had answered a signal from the mews. Alonso smiled to himself. Things were getting exciting. There could be only one explanation. The gang, of whom Heckenheimer had been warned, were at work and, what was more important, they were evidently in communication with someone in the house. He crept along the side of the house until he stood immediately below the dining room window. The window was slightly open at the top, and from inside he could hear the unmistakable sound of snoring. Suddenly an idea flashed into his head. Was the detective in the dining room asleep, or had he been drugged? Supposing one of the servants inside the house was in league with the individual who had whistled from the mews. Alonso crept along by the house wall until he came to the rear end, which was overshadowed by a tree. The architecture of the house presented many footholds and, with a final glance round, he commenced to climb, finding himself after a few minutes' endeavor outside a small window, just above the first floor. The window was unlatched, and it was the work of a moment to climb through. He closed the window behind him, and found himself on the landing of a small stairway, dimly lit. Opposite him, on the other side of the landing was a door, and he could see the gleam of light underneath the crack. He tiptoed carefully in the direction of the stairs. As he did so, the door opened and a head protruded. "Is that you?" The head stopped speaking as it saw Alonzo. McTavish, without hesitation, stopped forward, and struck the man fairly between the eyes. The man dropped like a log. Alonzo pulled the prostrate figure into the room and, shutting the door behind him, took stock of the situation. The man whom he had knocked unconscious was obviously the butler, who had evidently made no attempt to go to bed. Alonzo tiptoed to the window and, cautiously drawing back the edge of the blind, looked out. On the far side of the mews he could just discern a figure waiting in the darkness, and, as he watched, the soft whistle was repeated. Alonzo smiled once more. The matter was becoming really interesting. The butler was evidently an accomplice of the gang, a member of which was waiting outside in the mews until the coast was clear. Alonzo dragged the portly form of the butler to the bedside and, with difficulty, raised the unconscious figure onto the bed. Then he securely bound and gagged the unfortunate menial and, switching off the light, left the room. He continued his journey downstairs and had succeeded in reaching the ground floor, when the sound of heavy footsteps sent him behind the cover of a hanging curtain. The footsteps approached and a light was switched on. Through a fold in the curtain Alonzo saw a man, evidently one of the detectives, look round the hall, and then, switching off the light, depart in the direction from whence he had come. Alonzo waited a moment, then, moving silently in the darkness, crossed the hall and gently turned the handle of the door, which he guessed was that of the dining room. He was greeted with a sound of heavy breathing. Crossing to the window, he slowly pulled down the blinds and, drawing his automatic pistol from his pocket, switched on his electric torch. Sprawled in a chair beside the long table, on which the glittering array of presents were laid out, was the recumbent figure of one of the detectives. Alonzo approached the man and put his face close to that of the sleeper. The unmistakable odor of chloroform came to his nostrils. The man had been drugged. Alonzo switched off his torch and, finding a chair beside him, sat down in the darkness. The situation was fairly apparent. The butler had drugged the detective and, being bound and gagged upstairs, was unable to signal to those outside to complete the job. He rose from the chair and switched on his torch, sending the beam of light along the glittering table. There, in its black morocco case in a place of honor in the center of the table, was the £10,000 pearl necklace. Alonzo, a connoisseur of pearls, admired the matchless beauty of the necklace. As he moved towards the table, the beam of light from his electric torch fell on the handle of the door. It was slowly and silently turning. In a flash Alonzo switched off his torch and, with cat-like steps, moved to the dark shadows by the side of the window. The door slowly opened and, against the dim light in the hall outside, Alonzo saw the slim figure of a girl framed in the doorway. She wore a trim costume and hat, and in her hand was a small attaché case. Swiftly and silently she closed the door behind her and, as Alonzo drew further back against the wall, the light from the torch she carried lit up the table once more. She approached the table and, disregarding the lesser jewelry, took the necklace in its case from the table. She was about to move towards the door when Alonzo stepped forward. "Please don't be frightened," he said. "Won't you sit down?" He drew forward a chair, and, with a little smile, for she had entirely recovered her self-possession, she seated herself. "I suppose you are one of the new detectives," she said with a smile. "Nothing so interesting," replied Alonzo. "I am Alonzo McTavish." She gave a little start. "McTavish," she exclaimed softly. "The swell cracksman, the man the police can't catch." Alonzo bowed. "I hope they never will," he said. "But it seems to me that unless we are fairly expeditious they'll get the pair of us. Someone is sure to come along in a moment, you know." In the meantime, I suggest that we come to some arrangement about this pearl necklace. Being in the same line of business, don't you think we ought to go fair halves?" She smiled, and the light of the torch lit up the gold of her hair. Suddenly there was a noise of hurried footsteps in the hall. Alonso sprang to his feet and snatched the case from the girl's hand. "Quick," he said. "Behind that curtain by the window. You'll find the window open. Go quickly." He pushed the girl behind the window curtains and turned, the necklace in his hands, as the electric light flashed on and two men entered the room. The shorter man covered Alonso with a revolver. "This is the fellow, Mr. Heckenheimer," he said. "We found the butler bound and gagged upstairs, and look, Seaton's drugged. A pretty near thing." He mopped his brow. Heckenheimer, scowling under his heavy brows, advanced and snatched the necklace case from Alonso's hand.